thank you all for coming out on this evening. I know you have many other things to do, and we really appreciate the opportunity to hear from you. So I am Vicki Bean. I'm a professor at NYU Law School and one of the faculty directors of the Furman Center for Real Estate and Urban Policy at NYU. And I am one of the co-chairs of the Tax Reform Commission. I send regrets from my co-chair, Mark Shaw, who had a personal engagement that he couldn't miss. So let me just tell you a couple of things about the commission, and then the commission members will all introduce themselves. So the commission was established by both the mayor and the city council earlier in the summer, and charged with making recommendations to make New York City's property tax system fairer, simpler, and more transparent. And that is our mission. We're taking all three of those charges very seriously. And the charge was to hold an initial round of public hearings like this one in order to hear from you about your concerns, any ideas that you have about improving the system, any concerns that you have about reforms that might be proposed. And then we will take all that under advisement and issue a preliminary report sometime in January or February, early in the new year. We will then come back to you and ask, have another round of public hearings in order to hear your responses or your reactions to some of the preliminary recommendations that the commission makes. And then we will issue a final report over the summer. So we very much, as I said, want to hear from you about your experiences with the tax system, your concerns about the property tax system, the assessment system, et cetera, and any ideas that you have for improving the system. So let me start to my right by asking each of the members of the commission to introduce themselves. James.
James Parrott. I'm Director of Economic and Fiscal Policies at the Center for New York City Affairs at the New School, and a Brooklyn homeowner for almost 25 years.
Good evening. My name is Gary Rodney. I run a national affordable housing tax credit syndication firm where I finance affordable housing.
I'm Alan Capelli. I'm a native New Yorker. I own a one-family home for over 30 years, so it's Class 1 property holder. I was also on a cooperative board of directors where my daughter lives, and managed that for 20 years, so I'm pretty familiar with the problems relating to one-family homes and cooperatives and condominiums.
I'm Carol O'Claricon. I'm an economist by training, and I am a former New York City Finance Commissioner and Budget Director under David Dinkins.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Elizabeth Velez. I'm president of the Velez Organization. We're real estate developers and proud girl from Brooklyn.
And
I'm Emra Dev. I'm with the City Council's Finance Division. I'm sitting in for Latanya McKinney, the director who can't be here tonight.
I'm Raymond Majeski. I'm Deputy Director and Chief Economist at the City Council's Finance Division, and I'm a Brooklyn boy and a co-op owner.
I'm Jacques Gia, and I'm New York City Commissioner of Finance.
Francesco Brindisi, Office of Management and Budget.
So without further ado, we'll begin to hear from you all. So because we have a lot of people in attendance, we will ask that you limit your remarks to 3 minutes, and there's a clock that will tell you and us how you're doing on that 3 minutes. The commissioners may ask you questions. You may submit your testimony in writing, either through the portal or directly. You can, if you have something in writing, you can submit to us. So we will get started. We will call you in the order in which you signed up, except that we do the courtesy of allowing some of the elected representatives, your elected representatives, speak first. So with that, well, let me say one other thing. For anyone who has an issue about their personal taxes and wants help, there are representatives from the Department of Finance out in the lobby who can help you with any particular issues that they might be able to resolve about your particular taxes. So with that, let us start with Councilman Deutsch. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, and it's really, I made sure to get here at 6:30 sharp. I think I walked in here 6:30, and I'm really pleased by the crowd here and making the time to come out here today. So let me just tell you, everything we do in life, we get taxed, right? You're married, you get taxed. You go shopping, you get taxed. You buy a car, you get taxed. You buy gas, you get taxed. So at least leave us alone when we're at home. You know, the problem is with property tax is too goddamn high. And we need to make sure that our voices are heard loud and clear. Unfortunately, my voice is not all there. I'm feeling a little under the weather. That's because I've been yelling at city agencies all month long. But let me just tell you that as a property owner, if you own a property, and we all know how high the taxes are. Many of us, as a teenagers, began to work, putting your pennies together. As you get older, you're putting your dimes together, your quarters together, your dollars. And then you're spending your hard-earned money to purchase your first home. And then you get killed with the property taxes. And we need to make sure, as New Yorkers, that all New Yorkers stay in New York. You don't move upstate, you don't move to other states, you don't move to other countries. We need to make sure New York City is affordable for all homeowners. In addition to that, people that rent, right? You move into an apartment maybe 30 years ago, 40 years ago, or 5 years ago, and you try to find an apartment that's affordable to you. And when your landlord gets hit with high taxes, he doesn't pay for it. He passes these taxes on to you. Now your rent goes up. And we need to make sure, whether you're a property owner or you own a home or you rent, that property taxes is something that we as a city, as a state, as the mayor of the city of New York, as the governor of the state of New York, looks out for people like us, for the little guys like us. So I have a very long testimony I'm going to submit, but I want to give everyone an opportunity. I'll be sitting here in the front listening to what you have to say. And I want to just thank my two colleagues who I work with in the City Council and Department of Finance. Really, really knowledgeable, stand-up people, and it's really an honor for me to work with them throughout the year in the City Council. So finally, I just want to say to each and every one of you, thank you for coming out. Thank you for making your voices heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Okay, I next have, I believe it's Ryan Leness. Is that anybody's name? Ryan Lynch. Lynch, okay, sorry.
Good evening, everyone. Hello. My name is Ryan Lynch. I'm the Policy Director for Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams. Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. We really appreciate you coming to talk about this really important issue. And thank you to the commissioners for hosting, being here today. We're thrilled to host you. This is a hearing. I'm here to read a statement on behalf of Borough President Adams. This is a hearing that is long overdue. New York City's property tax system is an unnecessary labyrinth of confusion that hinders and hurts all it touches, homeowners and renters alike. In a borough that is home to some of the most expensive real estate in the city, the way property taxes are assessed is unfair, lacking in transparency, and overly burdensome, particularly in communities of color, which often see higher effective property tax rates than their more affluent counterparts. Homeowners have been suffering under this unfair assessment system for too long, one that places different property tax burdens on similarly valued properties across the 5 boroughs. And renters often bear the burden of this unequal system as the cost is passed on through increasing rents across New York City. This commission must develop a system that is fair to both homeowners and renters and transparent enough as it considers their recommendations moving forward. As this process continues, the Commission must do better in engaging a broader swath of the population, especially as our office has received concerns about the outreach process for this and other hearings. According to the United States Census, the 2012-2016 owner-occupied housing unit rates were approximately 30%. In a borough of 2.6 million people and 1.04 million housing units, owner-occupied housing units, the fact that we can barely fill a room capable of holding 200 people is appalling. This conversation must broaden the outreach effort to not only include homeowners and their associations, but also engagement of tenant advocacy organizations. Public hearings are supposed to be predicated on the fact that public input is valued. However, the notification process must give residents time to prepare meaningful testimony. We're eager to hear the testimony tonight, and we urge the Commission to further engage homeowners and tenants as this process continues and moves forward. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Ryan, if I could ask a question?
Yeah, please.
So, as you understand what our charge is, that any change has to be neutral in terms of the total revenues it brings into the city. Undoubtedly, there are many people whose property tax rates relative to the market value are higher than they should be. And if those come down and we adhere to neutrality in terms of aggregate revenue, taxes are going to have to go up for others, right? How do we convince people that it's important to raise taxes on some in order to lower taxes on others?
That's the charge that you're put forth, right? So I'm not a tax expert, so we're looking to the guidance of the Commission and the recommendations that come forth from the Commission to figure out a way to make this a more fair and transparent process.
If the Borough President has any suggestions on that question, we would love to hear those.
Sure.
Thank you.
And similarly, Mr. Lynch, do you have suggestions about how we could do better on public engagement?
So considering I'm in charge of drafting testimony for the Borough President's Office, we're hosting this here at Borough Hall. I only was made aware of this hearing about a week ago, less than a week ago. So
A week, did you say?
Yeah. I was not only made aware of this about a week ago. So that's very concerning to me on behalf of the Borough President and on behalf of the residents that we represent and constituents we represent. Perhaps going through some of the community tenant-based organizations that are organizing. I know that I was told that this has been up on your website for quite some time, but pushing that out further, engaging in local partners to ask us to push it out, or local council members to push it out, or trusted validators on the ground, whether those are tenant organizers or homeowners associations. That would be very, very helpful to get the message out.
Can we count on your office to help publicize the second hearing we're going to do in this borough?
Absolutely. If you can send it over to the information, the flyers over to us in a timely manner. We have our Brooklyn Bulletin that goes out to thousands of households. We have an outreach coordinator that can strategically send these flyers out to the appropriate locations across the borough. We're happy to partner to get the word out more.
Thank you.
Also, though, Mr. Lynch, people can submit any testimony in writing between now and, when we issue the preliminary recommendations. So if you have ways to push it out, please do so now.
Sure, we are happy to push that out through social media, through our connections, but we also need to know where, people need to know where that portal is to be put forth.
Okay, we will
Okay.
get that information to
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Fran Vella-Marone, representing Congressman Dan Donovan.
Thank you. As you said, my name is Fran Vella-Marone, and I'm here representing Congressman Donovan. I have a statement which I'm going to read. Thank you to the New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform for the opportunity to offer testimony on this important issue to Brooklynites. As a federal representative for South Brooklyn, I am all too aware of the property tax system that burdens my constituents. New York's 11th Congressional District is a bastion of middle-class households. Nevertheless, the city taxes its wealthiest citizens at a lower effective property rate. As I said in last month's hearing on Staten Island, we need to deliver concrete results that alleviate this burden through remedies such as enhanced tax exemptions for seniors, veterans, and hardworking families. Level the playing field for South Brooklyn's middle class by reining in the city's wealthiest neighborhoods so that they pay a fairer rate. Mr. Mayor, I again ask that you join the fight for beleaguered middle-class families in my district and reform the city's property tax structure to make more equitable for them. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you.
And, again, if the congressman has ideas in answer to Commissioner Parrott's question about how you convince some of those whose taxes will need to go up in order to make them fairer for all, we would appreciate hearing. Okay, thank you. Mitu Maroof for Assistant Speaker Felix Ortiz.
Good evening. Thank you. My name is Mitu Maroof. I'm here on behalf of Assistant Speaker Felix Ortiz, and I'm going to represent the following testimony on his behalf. In New York State, the property tax is a local tax raised and spent on financing local government and public schools, police and fire protection, road maintenance, and other municipal services. However, New York City's property tax rate has grown at triple the rate of working New Yorkers' income over the past decade, making it very hard for taxpayers at the lower end of the economic scale to make ends meet. Property taxes take up large portions of homeowners' income, particularly for households making less than $50,000 a year. In 2005, households making less than $50,000 paid an average property tax of $1,940. By 2016, they were shelling out $3,849. While median salaries for the group stayed relatively flat at just under $33,000. These taxpayers had their property tax burden nearly double between 2005 and 2016, growing from 6.6% to 12.7% of their income. Even taxpayers who earned between $50,000 and $100,000 paid 3.4% of their earning to property taxes in 2005, we're paying 5.4% by 2016. In my district, retired families continue to be displaced by the high property taxes. These families anticipated passing their homes onto their children and now face doubt about whether they will be able to stay. It is not fair for working families to have increasing taxes and stagnating wages while higher earning households are paying less. It is not fair for retired families to worry about losing their homes. Our seniors should not be worried about whether to pay their tax or pay for food or other necessities. We can make the system more fair by distributing the property tax burden onto those who can afford to pay instead of those struggling to stay in their homes. New Yorkers must be able to pay taxes they can afford. We cannot tax our residents to the point where they cannot support their families or be able to stay in the city, as they are the backbones of our communities and our economy. Let's make sure that they can continue to afford to live in this great city. Thank you.
Thank
you.
Is that written testimony? Sir, that's written testimony, and you'll submit that written testimony, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, Mark Willis.
Thank you. I want to address all the commissioners here. Professor Bean, sorry. I am using the mic. Yes. Okay. My name is Mark Willis. I'm a senior policy fellow at the NYU Furman Center for Real Estate and Urban Policy. The views expressed in this testimony are my own and should not be construed as representing any official position of New York University or the NYU Furman Center. As many of you may know, my involvement with the New York City property tax actually predates the current law. I was an urban economist at the Federal Reserve Bank and did the original analysis of what the assessment ratios were in the prior system, and then became a consultant to the study that Professor did at the time of the examination in the early 1980s. I've remained a close observer here, and as it will not surprise you, I have a number of views that I'd like to share with you. I've submitted my written testimony, and so I'm only going to summarize here what I want to cover. I will mention the Furman Center just recently issued a policy minute, which documents, as many other people have, all of the inequities, disparities across, within and across classes. So what I want to do here is highlight and suggest some next steps to mitigate the consequences of what are my view of the three key causes of disparities. The first are caps on how fast the assessed values of individual properties can increase. Second, the share of the levy that goes to each of these classes. And third, the divergence between the actual sale prices and DOF's estimates of market value. So the caps, as I'm sure you're all very well aware, on how fast assessments can go up, have really resulted in increased divergence in assessment ratios between properties where market values are rising faster than the caps allow. Similar problem is with the shares. They have not been adjusted. Again, we'll talk about the legal issues here, but have not been adjusted to reflect the extent of the relative changes in market values across the four classes. And the appraisal methods of DOF, also in some ways constrained by the law, but otherwise, the corporate condo one is well known to all of you. It may interest you that some work that we did at the Furman Center showed that the actual assessment ratio to market value of co-ops and condos looks a lot like Class 1 for condos and co-ops of $4 million or less. There's also an issue, I think, with regard to the appraising of multifamily properties that are units that are required to be affordable. So let me be very quick here with my ideas. The four key things that I think you should think about. Whatever changes we make should be done very gradually so as not to disrupt property markets, particularly with regard to the production of housing is an area of particular concern for me. I would address, as a first area of focus, the assessment, the cap issue in Class 1. There are two ways to do that, as you know. We might get the legislature to repeal it. That would be nice. But there is another way to continually reduce the target assessment ratios and correspondingly increase the tax rate. That would work. And my thought here is take as long as you want. It may be shocking, but take 10, 20 years, doesn't matter. If you want to do this and create a system that's more fair and equitable, then the best way to do it is do it while inflation and nominal values probably won't fall if you spread it out long enough. The differences across effective tax rates across classes, I think that it may make sense to have a residential class. People are very concerned that multifamily is taxed too high. If you do that, it's very important to keep the relative tax rate for the combined Class 1 and Class 2, which is your residential class, keep it relative to the commercial the same as it is today overall. Otherwise, you risk changing the uses of land in the city by raising the relative cost of relative taxes on residential. I would add here, in case anybody in the audience thinks it's possible, reducing the taxes on multifamily is not probably going to reduce the rates that landlords charge, other than what the Rent Guidelines Board may do. The last thing is to have a transparent system, and I think that the way to do that is have market assessed values at market rate, at market levels for as much of the property as possible, and make sure that the assessed values truly reflect what market prices are, and that way people could tell if they are being taxed at the same effective rate as the rest of people in their class.
Thank
Happy
you.
to answer any questions, and sorry for going on.
Well, we appreciate hearing ideas for solutions, so I let you go on a little bit long. But I should say, before I turn to my other commissioners, that while both Mark and I are at the Furman Center, we have built a wall between what the Furman Center is saying about this and my role as commissioner. So,
And as I
James.
point out, I'm not speaking even for the Furman Center, but for myself. Yes.
Thank you for the work at the Furman Center, Mark, and for your work on property taxes over the years. I've learned a lot from both of those. I'd like to ask you a variation of the question I asked the representative from the borough president earlier. So if we take a long period to phase in changes to reduce inequities that exist, we're going to lower taxes on some people and raise taxes on other people. So are there other mechanisms within the overall mandate of neutrality in terms of property tax revenue, are there issues within Class 4? And I'm thinking in particular of the growing, what appears to be a growing incidence of absentee ownership of co-ops and condos and single-family homes around New York City. Would you support the idea of having a higher tax on non-resident owners as a way to provide property tax relief to those people who are overtaxed currently?
To remind me one thing I should have mentioned, I'm fully in favor of a circuit breaker for lower income households. In terms of Class 4, in terms of a higher tax, I'm sorry, on non-occupants, I just don't think the property tax system is the place to do that. If there is some other fee that people want to apply, I personally would not try and do it through the property tax system. And all you're going to do probably is get people to have somebody occupy it for free. There are just ways around that. I think just adding a lot of complexity, you're probably not going to get much revenue by doing that as part of the property tax system.
And are there inequities that extend to the Class 4 that you think should be addressed, or are there ways to raise revenue through Class 4 to fund tax relief in Classes 1 and 2?
If you raise taxes on one class relative to the other, you are essentially, from an economics point of view, favoring one class over another. So do we want to favor residential over commercial more than we do now? I don't know. I'm not making that judgment. But I think it's naive to say, all right, there are these big corporations and they got lots of money, so we should just raise the property tax on them. I'm not saying that's what you said, but I think that from an economist's point of view, you want to look at what is going to be the most efficient tax system for the city to continue to grow. And taxing one versus another more than they are now will affect the relative uses of land, quite honestly. So, if we were starting from scratch, I'd tax everybody the same, or I'd consider that. But we're path dependent. Land prices have adjusted to the system that we have.
Mark, one of the things you haven't mentioned is resets on sale for, the caps on Class 1, essentially taking on sale everybody back to the 6% assessment ratio. Why not? What don't you like about it? Or it just wasn't consideration?
You could add that on, because then that's not affecting the people who are there now, although it would probably affect the value of their property. And people have mortgages and they're collateralized. If you start playing with that, doing that too dramatically, I think you could be very disruptive. So again, whatever you do, just do it over time.
Commissioner Capelli?
No, I'm not asked and answered.
Okay.
No, I just wanted to say something in your response to Commissioner Parrott's comment about Class 4. And we all know this has been in place, these class shares have been in place since 1981. And we know that they have fluctuated. The share of revenue that's actually coming from Class 1 property owners, Class 2 and Class 4 has fluctuated. So in some way, I think we have to assume that there is no magic bullet or no magic proportion among these kinds of properties. Yes, I agree with you, it's more or less a political call, but we ought to know that there have been periods of time in New York City history, recent history, where Class 4 has borne a larger portion of the property tax levy than it's currently bearing, and other times when Class 1 has borne more than it's bearing.
Right. It depends what your criteria are. And,
yes.
Class 1, the assessment ratio was 18 to 20% at one point. So it's fallen to 6, even if you adjust for the 50% high tax rate, it's equivalent to 9. So the effective tax in Class 1 has fallen a lot.
Yes.
Right? And that means it's risen a lot in Class 4.
Yeah.
Your other point is just another way of looking at that.
Yes, we can look at effective rates, and we can also look at shares of the burden.
Because, Class 1 values have gone up so much faster than Class 4 values over time.
Thank you very much.
I look forward to your written testimony.
Okay, I have submitted already the appearance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Levin?
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. My name is Stephen Levin. I'm a council member in the 33rd District, which includes the neighborhoods of Greenpoint, Williamsburg, Bedford-Stuyvesant, Vinegar Hill, Dumbo, downtown Brooklyn, Brooklyn Heights, and Borum Hill. I'd like to thank the New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform and Mayor Bill de Blasio and City Council Speaker Corey Johnson for their work in forming this commission. Tonight's public hearing is critically important. Property tax rates across the city are vastly uneven and in need of a fix. We are overdue in addressing the system's inequalities. Assessment caps have created an imbalance in property taxes and disproportionately affect residents in more rent-stable neighborhoods, such as in the outer boroughs and rapidly appreciating neighborhoods. Our property tax system needs to be more predictable and fair when it comes to assessment increases, and we should balance a gradual approach that is considerate of residents who have worked within the system for a long time. One issue that demands immediate attention is the need for transparency in valuing cooperatives and condominiums in North Brooklyn. Condominium property values are assessed without a clear or predictable measure, and as a result, property owners in lower income bracket neighborhoods, such as South Williamsburg, have been forced to pay a similar tax rate to luxury buildings, often in nearby neighborhoods like North Williamsburg. In Williamsburg, property tax rates are set by a combination of a borough-wide radius measurement and matching North and South Williamsburg together. This combination has led to an imbalanced property value that favors nearby geography over the real property values themselves. As a result, north side Williamsburg condo values are used as a market rate level for south side Williamsburg properties, despite significant economic disparities. The examples are very stark. Instances where two properties nearby are valued very, very differently. In one, condo buildings in South Williamsburg within 5 blocks of one another with the same set of comparables, and yet one was assessed at double the market rate than the other. Department of Finance justified this based on adjustments, but refused to give an explanation as to what those adjustments were based on, protecting itself by saying it's a work product that they don't have to give to anybody, including elected officials. And so there can be significant recommendations that we believe can come out of this. Transparency, providing information on the formulas of how Department of Finance bases their market valuations and adjustments that they take into consideration. They should use the same assessment systems and should not re-increase the taxes in years after a successful appeal, because the appeal process is also very onerous. We need a more responsive assessment of property taxes. The Department of Finance should incorporate data from the Department of Buildings on luxury amenities, like elevators and gyms, into the assessment model to improve accuracy of luxury versus non-luxury classifications and foster a more balanced system, not just predicted on geography. We need to address transparencies in these tools. As I said, lack of clarity makes it difficult for homeowners to know how to appeal a tax rate increase if they find it unfair, adding to community frustration. So I look forward to working with my colleagues in the council and the administration and you all to address property tax reform and establish tax rates that are simpler, clearer, and fairer for all New York City residents.
Thank you. Any questions? So, Councilmember, the problem with the assessments is in the choice of the comparables, in your view, or what exactly is going wrong in the assessment process from your view?
Well, honestly, after a couple of years of trying to figure this out and meetings with the Department of Finance, I certainly don't feel like I understand it well enough to really point out where the problem is. I think that there is this issue of where the comparables are coming from, but also with these adjustments, there's a lack of clarity as to why. I mean, the example that I provided, here you have two condos in the same neighborhood, both in South Williamsburg, being assessed at wildly different rates, and what's factored into it is an adjustment that is opaque. It's hard for me to say what could possibly go into that if I don't know, if they're not sharing with that with either the owner or the elected official. But there is this concern that that it's using a kind of the radius that they use in a neighborhood like Williamsburg, which has a density comparable to Manhattan, is actually using the borough-wide Brooklyn radius. I think it's 8,000 feet, and so you would have, it's a much broader radius than you would see, even though the density in a place like Williamsburg is much more comparable to the East Village or Greenwich Village or a lot of neighborhoods in Manhattan, Upper East Side, for example.
And is it your experience that the appeals process can't take care of that, or isn't taking care of that?
I hear complaints.
Because that would be the obvious place to go.
I mean, we have been working with your office and folks in the neighborhood for a long time over the same issue.
Yeah.
And we have provided you an explanation. We don't agree with the explanation that is provided to you, but I would think that it behooves you to explain to the rest of the world that we have provided your office with an explanation. And you have appealed it to the tax commission.
Yes.
And have not been successful on many occasions. Okay, so which reaffirms the methodology that is using by the Department of Finance.
I just think if the methodology was sound across the board, you wouldn't see a disparity between two very similar properties and in the same neighborhood. I mean, just to be clear, because of the way that New York City neighborhoods develop, you could have wildly different economic realities from 3 blocks apart.
Of course.
For example, in Williamsburg, where in South Williamsburg you have, even though you do have condo buildings and condos there and co-ops, the AMI is dramatically lower in certain census tracts than if you cross over to the north side, which is which is truly it's beyond gentrification at this point. It's a luxury market, and if you're comparing, if you're using as a comparable North 6th Street to South 9th Street, it's a wildly different. You have things like gyms and pools and things in condo buildings on the north side that you just don't have.
We also adjust for these things.
But without clarity in what's going into the adjustments, it's hard for us to know whether they're appropriate or not. And I mean, just frankly, I mean, I've been getting complaints about this for years, and it's hard for me to fully understand whether it's fair or not. But based on the complaints that I get, it certainly behooved me to come and testify about this.
Sure.
You'll submit those examples, the examples that you gave?
I'll have to amend my written remarks, but I will do that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Commissioner Cavalli.
Councilman, thank you for joining us this evening. Understanding that there may be, as you say, reasons to differentiate between certain properties like amenities in the property, and the Finance Commissioner addressed that to some extent with you. But where you have identical properties that are taxed blocks away or a neighborhood apart, and one is taxed at 2 times or 2.5 times the rate of the other property, how do we get to fairness?
Well, I don't know. I think that kind of I think looking at more granular data might be more appropriate. I mean, I understand that sometimes you can't get a comparable condo within a block or two, but looking at census tract AMI maybe, or kind of getting more granular so that you're, one thing just as a recommendation. changes at the state level and the city getting behind. We have a session in Albany coming up. I'd be interested in the city getting behind reforms that could be done in Albany, or maybe as the recommendations coming out of this commission, which should obviously carry some traction with our state colleagues, I think would be something to explore.
We hope so. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Barbara Bowen.
Good evening, commissioners. Good evening, friends here. I'm the president of the union at the City University of New York, the PSC, and we have a two-part testimony, 3 minutes for me, 3 minutes for my colleague, Professor Fabricant. We want to bring to the Commission's attention a significant source of foregone tax revenue. So our proposal goes beyond neutrality and toward additional income for the city. We believe that the Commission should consider whether it is still appropriate to exempt private universities from all New York City property taxes. Specifically, we ask that you consider whether the two largest private universities in the city, NYU and Columbia, both of which receive enormous benefit from New York City public services, should continue to be exempt from virtually all property tax. Not only do Columbia and NYU rely heavily on city services, such as transit, parks, streets, firefighters, sanitation, and police, all of which they receive without paying any property tax to the city, almost any, but they also rely on the city's rich cultural life to attract scholars, researchers, and students. It is fair to say that neither NYU nor Columbia would have been able to expand in their last 2 decades of enormous expansion without the services and benefits of New York City. A very conservative estimate of the value of the foregone revenue is $189 million annually from NYU and $274 million annually from Columbia. That is a total of $463 million, close to $500 million in foregone property tax per year. Those estimates are based entirely on the Department of Finance figures and their formula for determining market value. We, in fact, believe that the figures are too low, but they're an important starting point. NYU and the NYU hospital system own 105 buildings in Manhattan and Brooklyn, mostly Manhattan. Most are fully exempt from property taxes. About a third are partially exempt. The Department of Finance gives these holdings an assessed value of $1.7 billion, which converts through the DOF's own formula to a market value of $3.7 billion. The potential property tax responsibility of NYU under this formula would be $188.5 million. Columbia and Columbia Presbyterian Hospitals own 194 buildings. Assuming these buildings are all class 2, 3, or 4 buildings, the market value of Columbia's real estate based solely on the DOF figures would be $5.6 billion. The corresponding property tax would be $274 million per year. NYU's endowment, just to remind folks, I'm almost finished, is $4 billion. Columbia just announced last week that its endowment had reached $11 billion. This is not an attack on Columbia and NYU. Both universities contribute tremendously to the cultural and intellectual life of the city. We at CUNY feel enriched by that. I'll just finish. The presence of major universities with their communities of scholars, artists, professional schools, and their public programs is a significant draw and resource for New York. But the majority of New York City's college students do not attend Columbia or NYU. And here I turn it over, if I may, to the next speaker, I believe.
Yes, that's fine, Mr. Fabricant.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The majority of New York City's college students attend CUNY. In fact, nearly 2/3 of the city's high school graduates who attend college attend CUNY. While NYU and Columbia pay no property taxes, their students get the benefit of small classes, full-time professors, readily available counselors, abundantly equipped libraries, laboratories, and student centers. CUNY continues to be underfunded, so our students have to make do with crowded classrooms, leaky ceilings, too few full-time professors, and a dangerous shortage of counselors. CUNY undergraduates at the community colleges which receive funding from the city are 85% people of color and have average family incomes below $30,000. We propose that the Commission rethink the tax exemption of Columbia and NYU, collect appropriate tax revenue from these two major universities, and invest that revenue in New York's public university, CUNY. It is profoundly unjust that New York's big, expensive private universities reap all the benefits of being tax-free in New York City, while New York's public university is starved of funds. And I just want to give you two quick examples of that starvation. Part-time faculty who receive $3,200 per class, you multiply that by a full load of between 6 and 8, is anywhere between approximately $25,000 and $30,000 per year, less than, for some, than what, in fact, is the student's family income of $30,000 per year. And that's for folks with master's degrees, some of whom have PhDs. We also have a rather low graduation rate. 3-year graduation rate for community colleges is approximately 22%, and for senior colleges, it's 55% in 6 years. We have a program within CUNY that only reaches 10% of all students, but it is more than double the graduation rates for CUNY students. That program and others require additional investments. Other cities in New York State, including Syracuse and Ithaca, and other cities nationally, such as Boston and Providence, have approached the problem of tax exemption for private universities by making agreements for payments in lieu of taxes or pilots. It's time for New York City to start collecting all, or at least part of that foregone $500 million and start investing in decent conditions for the vast majority of the city's college students. New York City cannot be the fairest city, big city in the world. It cannot even be minimally fair, while the 275,000 CUNY students endure substandard learning conditions and the big private universities reap massive benefits from being in the city but do not pay property taxes. And I'll conclude by saying this. This is a university that empirically has proven that students who attend it, that it in fact has the best record nationally of moving students from poverty into the middle class. It's probably the most effective anti-poverty agency in this city, but it's woefully, woefully underfunded.
Thank you. Commissioner Parrott.
I'd like to ask a question of the PSC representatives. Either one is fine. Thank you very much for raising this issue. You're undoubtedly aware that the charitable exemption from property taxes is baked into the state constitution. It's not an easy thing to do to change. So it's not clear what this commission is going to be able to do about it. Although I look forward to the discussions, given that we have a co-chair from CUNY and a co-chair from NYU.
We're very aware of that.
So, what would you suggest if it's not possible to levy property taxes on the largest private university? I assume from your testimony that you're only talking about those two very large, and how would you suggest the distinction be made just in terms of size and extent of property ownership?
So there's two questions there. I'll take the second one first. We focused on Columbia and NYU because of their size and their contribution, their potential contribution in taxes. I think that it would be possible to look at all the private universities in the city and take a look at that. That's an enormous undertaking, and there's something qualitatively different about the expansion into neighborhoods of Columbia and NYU and their vast real estate holdings. So that made it seem more appropriate to call on the commission to take a look at whether that vast real estate holding should be taxed. We are aware that there's an agreement that Columbia has with Morningside Heights area after a lot of agitation on the part of the neighborhood to contribute a small amount, much smaller than what we're talking about here, much smaller than their tax responsibility should they be taxed. And that exists already. But in answer to the first part of your question, so the second part is, yes, it would possibly be worth looking at all the private colleges, but I think it'd be more beneficial in terms of the volume and the imprint, the footprint in the city to start with Columbia and NYU. Second question about how could this be considered without changing state constitution. I think it'd still be useful for the commission to talk about it, and I'm aware that we have a co-chair from NYU tonight, and also the other one from CUNY. But I think it'd be a very useful conversation to have, and with national implications, especially because the universities have grown so much since that tax exemption was put into the state constitution. But there is an alternative solution, and Mike pointed a bit to that, and that is what's called payments in lieu of taxes, pilots. And there are pilots in Boston, Providence, some other places. There are two that I think there might be more in New York, Syracuse, and Ithaca. And in those cases, the universities come to an agreement after hearing the kind of response from the people of the city about the potential tax burden or the foregone revenue for the city. And rather than do a straight taxation, they make an agreement for a pilot. And we think that New York should consider pilots, at least with Columbia and NYU, to come to an agreement that does not involve changing the state constitution and that could bring in significant revenue. And as we said, we see it being needed desperately for the public university in New York.
Are you proposing that it actually be earmarked, or that we suggest that it be earmarked?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, yes. We know there are many worthy causes in New York, but this is income foregone or potentially new income from universities, and we believe that in order to serve the whole city, the city needs to invest that money, to have more money to invest in the city's university, which is CUNY, and is desperately underfunded.
Mike, before you start, if you have research on pilot agreements that exist in other places, it would be very helpful if you could share that if it wasn't part of your testimony.
Yes, we tried to keep it short, but we
Thank
do.
you.
The only thing I would add to the question of why private to public, because the inequality between these systems is extraordinary. And I hear, as folks are testifying, this question of inequality and redistribution. And many of you, Jim particularly, has raised, Commissioner Parrott, how would you pay for it? We're offering you, or presenting, a way in which to do it to narrow the inequality that exists, at least one way, to narrow the inequality between these two systems. And we believe that the pilot should be dedicated in such a way that the dollars for public higher education in one sector are in fact subsidizing in the other sector in order to support those students who really deserve a whole lot more investment than they're receiving presently.
Can I just clarify the reference that you made to Columbia? That wasn't a pilot. That's the community benefit.
There's a community
agreements?
benefit.
Right.
I
Okay.
think it's called the Morningside.
Okay, just to
You're right. It's
clarify.
not a pilot, but I just thought, as you are, some of the commissioners would be aware of it, and it is true that there has been some agreement to contribute to the community, but it's not a pilot. And as we've said, we believe that this should be earmarked for public higher education, which is so desperately underfunded. Per student funding is lower than in K through 12. It's desperately underfunded. So we urge you to look at this added $500 million. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Monique Cumberbatch.
Good evening. I'm representing Kingsview Homes, which is a cooperative which has been part of Fort Greene since 1957. Kingsview was founded as a limited equity co-op as part of a massive urban renewal project. Unlike many housing developments of the day, which were open only to white applicants, Kingsview was intentionally racially integrated from the beginning and remains a vibrant, diverse community, and we wish for our community to remain that way for years to come. Though founded as a limited equity, Kingsview decided in 2005 to convert to market rate. As Kingsview has no commercial property and most of our income comes from maintenance to fund our operational budget and flip tax to assist with capital improvements. Due to gentrification and the high rate of rentals in the area, our real estate taxes have increased exponentially. Our co-op assessment and taxes are skyrocketing due to gentrification. Our apartments and those of our neighbors are now more valuable than they were prior to gentrification. In 2016, we were faced with nearly $1 million in real estate taxes. In 2021, our taxes will increase to nearly over $2 million. I provided copies of our assessment schedule on the portal. That would mean that we would need to raise maintenance upwards to $300 or more just to ensure we can pay taxes that continue to rise. To that end, eventually we would have homeowners forced to pay the same amount in maintenance as market rentals. Kingsview has been in this community for over 60 years, and I feel it's unfair that homeowners, most of which are seniors, may be forced to leave homes they own due to ever-increasing maintenance. Our development has historically been racially diverse, middle-income families, and the majority being seniors, some of which, like my mother and others, who were raised in NYCHA housing and achieved their dream of home ownership as adults at Kingsview. These residents are now seniors and deserve to enjoy their retirement without the threat of being unable to pay maintenance in homes they have owned for decades. As a board, we were forced to increase maintenance by 11% for 2018 and may be forced to raise maintenance every year. We have never had such a significant increase if we try to keep maintenance low to keep our cooperative as affordable and diverse as possible. We have a number of people who are on fixed incomes, and there are folks like myself who paid market value and have to balance paying maintenance and a mortgage. Tax incentives that new real estate developments receive, in addition to our taxes being based on overinflated rental prices, have hurt our community. As it stands, we're forced to do a chargeback assessment for STAR tax abatement since our operating budget cannot take a hit of $250,000 or more. Hence, there isn't much that we can offer our seniors and other residents on fixed incomes. So we welcome the opportunity to have this conversation. We would hope that we can have a seat at the table in these conversations. And as far as notification, I too would like to emphasize that it would be very beneficial in preparing for these types of meetings that we get notification less than a week before. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I ask you a question?
Ma'am, Ms. Cumberbatch?
I have a quick question
Ms.
for you.
Cumberbatch?
The $300 in maintenance costs that you're talking about, is that monthly?
Well, in terms of looking at what we need to do financially, as I said, we don't have any commercial income, and just trying to do a rudimentary look at how much the expenses will be and what our taxes will be in the future. That may be a number that we would have to increase monthly over a period of time, not all at once, but it may be something that we would have to do eventually.
Thank you.
And another quick one. While we reform this system, it's important that what we have to help folks like seniors, et cetera, is used. There is a senior homeowner exemption that exists specifically for helping people stay in their co-ops, condos, and homes. And I'm hoping, that if you talk to Commissioner Gia's team outside afterwards, I suspect they'd be willing to help your board reach out to your seniors and help more people get onto that benefit.
Okay, and is that part of the STAR assessment?
No.
Okay.
So
Seniors,
yes.
Specifically for seniors.
For seniors.
It's
I
really.
have a staff member back here.
If you reach out to them, they'll help you.
Thank you, Ms. Cumberbatch. Councilmember Williams.
Good to see you.
Hey, everybody. All right, I'm probably going to read this. I want to thank the commission for coming out to Brooklyn. Some of the people most struggling under the current system are in my area of Central Brooklyn. I also want to thank the commission for allowing me to speak, because currently I've been blocked by the administration from joining a suit by Tax Equity Now demanding reform for the system. But I'm appealing to the court, and just like I'm appealing to everybody here in the commission. Obviously, the first thing, somebody just asked me outside what I think of the system. I said it sucks. And this, of course, most people don't even understand what they're getting in the mail and don't understand why they're paying what they're paying. That, of course, is ubiquitous. I also want to just bring something else. Deeply entrenched within our system deeply entrenched flaws within our system have served as a wedge that over time widens the gap between the treatment of the rich and the rest in property tax assessment. It's been said that the tax system in this city is fundamentally broken. Right now, the system, I believe, is working as it may have been intended to, streamlining wealth accumulation and preservation for the rich and penalizing the poor. The inequity is not only related to the amount of money one owes. Unfortunately, oftentimes, how much melanin is in the community. Overwhelmingly, the individuals and neighborhoods being most devastated, although not the only ones being devastated, even targeted by the current tax structure, seems to be communities of more color. Draining money from the residents while providing breaks for the wealthiest blocks across the boroughs is holding back entire communities from financial advancement. People of more color are paying more into a system that supports them less. State law requires the city to base property assessments on sales of comparable properties, but the coalition's data shows homeowners in predominantly minority neighborhoods are overassessed by $1.7 billion. They paid $376 million, or an average of $844 per homeowner, more than they would if their properties had been accurately appraised based on comparative sales. Under the current property tax scheme, people of more color are a minority population in the 15 lowest tax community planning districts, but make up 72% of the 15 highest tax by effective rate. As the commission hears testimony around the city, we're urging not to just hear, but also to listen. Listen to the stories of people in low-income areas, of people of more color, of immigrants unable to get a leg up, working class folks in general, and see the wealthy thriving in a system rigged in their favor. The injustice and imbalance imposed by must be corrected, and the racial and class barriers that are set in place removed. And that's my testimony, and I'd be happy to take it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No questions?
None?
No. Thank you.
So we did ask a question earlier that I'd like to direct to you, Councilmember, which is in addressing some inequities like those that you point to, there will be people who have to pay more. And do you have any suggestions about how that transition could be handled, how we could bring people along about the need for adjustment where there are inequities?
That sucks too. And thank you, Commissioner. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
I think the most important thing is what's currently happening is not working, and we know it hasn't been working for a very long time, and it's unfortunate that we've continued that. And I just want to say again, I'm saddened that the mayor has prevented his 4 council members who have tried to sign on his amicus brief for a lawsuit, just trying to force the city to come up with something. It doesn't prescribe necessarily what it is, and they're blocking that. Whatever we do, and truth be told, I know this, there are also going to be, when we adjust this, Black and Latino homeowners that are going to pay more than they are now. So I don't want to say it's necessarily 1-for-1 on everything. Whatever we do, we just have to make sure it doesn't happen overnight. So we're going to have to make some changes. We're going to have to make some adjustments. People who are paying less are going to have to pay a little bit more in some cases, but we can't provide sticker shock. And so I think we have to do this in a reasonable amount of time. But we never adjusted for the type of house wealth accumulation that is occurring in so many of these communities. That has caused a huge difference in the effective tax rate that people are paying. And we have to just, we can't let it happen. So hopefully we can have a discussion as a community, as a city, to understand that it isn't fair, and some people may have to pay a little more that might not happen, but make sure that it's not happening overnight.
Yeah.
So any guidance that you can provide as to what is reasonable for a phase-in would be appreciated.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, City Council. I got to shout out my City Council people, Commissioner. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
More?
No.
No, I'm good?
Ralph
Peace, everybody.
Yoso.
Thank you, Commissioner. I just want to read the description on the website that the Commissioner talked about. Reform and make it fairer, simpler, and more transparent, while ensuring that no reduction in revenue to fund city services. So my question is, right now, the budget, the tax levy, which is the word you guys use, but it means all the tax that we are all paying, was $8 billion in around 2000. Now it's $28 billion that we as a group pay into the system. So this, while ensuring that no reduction in revenue used to fund city services, does that mean that the increases have to include, it has to include the increases too, right? It's not like we're staying at 28 billion. You and us have to keep paying at this 6% rate or the rate of growth there, correct? Right. So that means that everyone here is going to have to pay a lot more. And we have to be careful here because I have the Office of Management and Budget tax levy and tax shares document right from their, from their revenue budgeting document. And the truth is, Class 1 is paying very little compared to commercial property and compared to co-ops and condos. So the more we complain, and the more likely this Tax Equity Now lawsuit is going to force more tax on Class 1. I don't know if everyone here is Class 1, but I have Class 1 property, and we have to be careful because we may get what what we're asking for, we may get it, and we won't like it. So my other question has to do with the, an idea, solutions, right? Everyone that qualifies for STAR, which STAR is a state program that, that both has an income limit and owner-occupied requirement, is Class 1. So that would solve the co-op and condo problem, right? Phase out co-op and condo abatement over 10 years, phase in the 6% assessment over 10 years for all the people that qualify. And then phase out 421A and the hundreds of other abatements and exemptions that exist today. You wouldn't believe how many exemptions and abatements the the developers get, right? There's hundreds of them. It's not just 421A, that's the one you hear in the news. I just want to add that we also should, I'd like to have another round if anyone, is that depreciation is not accounted for in our system. So we in Bed-Stuy have shells of houses, 60-year-old houses that, or 100-year-old houses that have never been repaired, and then we go to repair them and we get socked with a 125% property tax increase. We already have a law for the Sandy victims, right? It's right here, I have it in my hand. The special damage for severe storm. Well, we should do the same thing that Philadelphia does, that many cities do. That you're fixing your own house, you should get a tax automatically. You shouldn't have to qualify for it, right? You're fixing anything that's permitted in Philadelphia, you automatically get an abatement. So I think that we, the people, the commission doesn't have much authority. All they can do is advise, right? We, the people, have to get involved and help the commission do things because they can only advise, but we, the people, can do more. And that's
Thank you.
And for transparency, I just want to say that anyone who wants these documents, the class share that shows the history, I have plenty of copies. It shows the history and why we have to be careful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Faye Patton? Sorry? Palin. I couldn't tell if it was a T or an L.
Sorry.
Thank you.
So good evening. Before I begin, I'd just like to say I am an example of CUNY. I'm a Brooklyn College graduate that came out of poverty into the middle class. And I had all full professors. I never had an adjunct professor in my entire time at Brooklyn College. So we need to raise CUNY to the same place that it stood before. However, I'm here on behalf of Oceana, which is a complex in Brighton Beach. It's 15 buildings. And I have to tell you, we're asking for parity. So I was a homeowner of a private home for 25 years. My last tax bill, and in fact, the people who were there, the taxes rose to $4,000. My taxes will be $22,000. And it's not just me. Just open the New York Times real estate section. This Sunday, you will see a brownstone over $2 million, and it gives you the taxes, just a little over $4,000. So we're asking for parity. The other question we have is assessment. It's not clear. Brighton Beach has been flat for the last 5 years, yet assessment has been rising. So that is very, very unclear to everyone living there. And the other thing I have to tell you is that we keep seeing people leaving, putting their place up for sale because they can no longer afford it. And you're losing people out of the city. We don't want that. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ma'am, the value of your single-family home and the value of your co-op were equivalent, even though one was paying $4,000 and the other paying $22,000?
So my single-family home was a large, yes, most definitely, was a large home, 11 rooms, not counting a finished basement, garage, front and back, tree-lined street, yes.
Got it. Okay, thank you very much. Gail George?
Hi, good evening. First of all, I don't have written testimony because I agree with our Borough President Eric Adams. I just happened to find out about this meeting today, and I came down to find out what time the meeting was, and lo and behold, people were signing in. So I waited, okay?
Thank you for coming.
So I have some concerns that I've been having for a while, so I came to the meeting to find out. One of the concerns I have in particular is about the designation of luxury housing. So many of our neighborhoods that we bought into were working class neighborhoods. They're working class people. However, this market appraisal that they use for the last property that's sold in your area, the properties that are selling are designated luxury housing, and they're selling for millions of dollars. And this is impacting people who are working people and working class people that purchase their homes prior to developers realizing that Brooklyn was a good place to live.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your coming. Valerie Francis Kingsview, or Valerie for?
Hello?
Yes.
Kind of low. Like Ms. Cumberbatch, I'm a second-generation resident of Kingsview, except I came from the first family that moved into Kingsview. My brother's now 61. He came in utero. Unfortunately, I like having my government job, but I don't imagine I'll ever really retire because I've always worked 2 jobs or always had 2 incomes. One was my Vietnam vet husband's disability payment I got, which was my child support, and the government job, which I have, which I can tell you, discrimination that goes on government jobs. I'm not there the way everybody else in my job that is not a person of color. But there's been lawsuits for the Parks Fund. That's what you should just look that up on the internet. You realize that's my situation. I'm a woman in a male's job. I'm a forester. So again, I've got all these barriers, but I've taught public school. I've always done 2 jobs. So I will not imagine how I can retire on a government job and not the other income and the flip tax, which I'm that old that I'm now the flip tax, so I have to live in a boat. So what my understanding, for the sake of clarity, I had heard that the newer buildings that went up, I kind of worked in the Parks Fund looking at plan reviews and all development going on, and it seems like some new buildings got tax exemptions, which developments of my age of infrastructure did not have. So that doesn't seem like there's any parity there, that we have to do repairs on a building, and as a car owner, I own my unit, my hole in the wall, I have to do repairs on my unit as well. So imagine that plus a flip tax, and I was a single mom. I don't know what I could leave my son. He'll have to be in a boat also. And he's a social worker, supposed to get this, a free education. I don't know who gets that. He went to a state university, and all these college students have debt. So what I see going on in Brooklyn is that we have a transient population coming in and out, and the people that are part of the older infrastructure living here are being tweaked out or made to look like they live in an Airbnb or boats. I'm hoping that that we'll have some flip back of the tax exemptions that the luxury units got, you know, that, so it goes back to the older infrastructure, maybe something like the gentleman mentioned about Philadelphia, where you get paid for the repairs, because it does not make any sense. And also, I mentioned that I got a disability benefit. I think the START program, I don't think I'd retire because I don't know when I'll be a senior citizen. They keep moving that Social Security away from me. But there are people I know, the SUNY teachers that have disabilities, adjuncts have disabilities, people with mental health issues that I can own my car. I can imagine them trying to manage the 2 jobs versus just everyday functioning. So other discounts besides age.
Okay, we appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
Yeah, just,
Commissioner?
excuse me.
Just one second.
I have a couple of questions. Do you own your own home?
I'm with Kingsley, but I can't talk on my own. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
I'm a single mom. I mean, that, yeah.
But you do own your own home?
I do my hole in the wall, my 1-bedroom apartment, raise my son in.
Okay, and how much property taxes do you pay a year, and how much is the place worth, market value?
Apartment value for 1 unit, there's, I don't even know what it's worth now, actually. I pay very little per month because, like I said, I'm in that 1-unit apartment, but the taxes have been amazing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Aaron Ross.
Hi. Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to voice our concerns. It's a very important thing that you're doing, and we all greatly appreciate it.
Excuse me 1 second. For this speaker and other speakers, it would be helpful to me and probably some of the other commissioners if you could say what community you're from, if you own your own home, how much your home is worth, and what kind of taxes you're paying, and how those taxes have increased over whatever period of time you've got experience with.
Okay, well, I live in Sheepshead Bay. I'm actually very lucky. I live with my grandmother. So my grandmother has a house in Sheepshead Bay that I live in. I believe she's paying between $6,000 and $7,000 a year. However, I have a mother and a father who have a condominium in Manhattan, Midtown Manhattan, and they're paying $25,000 a year. Actually, my father's not here today, but it's actually very hurtful to him because he can't retire. He has to delay his retirement because he needs to work to afford where he lives. I mean, it's bad in Brooklyn, but it's even worse in Manhattan. The property taxes, again, $25,000 a year is truly outrageous. Even $5,000 and $6,000 and $7,000 in Brooklyn is a lot. However, I just wanted to make a point that you have countries where there are no property taxes. You have certain places where actually, I could name a few countries like Kenya, Costa Rica, Malta, Greece. Actually, I don't think Greece, but Cyprus. There's a few countries that actually don't have property taxes. And, I just want to say that when you have property, whatever the property is, you'll buy a toothbrush, you'll buy a pair of shoes, you'll buy a coffee table. Whatever it is you buy, it is yours. When you buy a house, it is yours. And I think it's very wrong to be paying for something that is already yours, whether it's a house or a toothbrush. It's what is yours, and you shouldn't have to pay to keep something that is already yours. So I just want to say that I think that property taxes ought to be abolished completely, that there should be no property taxes because what is your property is your property.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You ready for a question?
No, I think we do.
I'm ready.
Okay, so nobody likes to pay property taxes, but we do like to have services, right? We like to have police protection, fire protection, garbage picked up, and so on. So If we didn't have property taxes, how would you suggest New York City fund the services that everybody relies on?
Income taxes. I mean, the city already gets revenue from income taxes, and it should be enough to cover those basic services that the city provides. Income taxes are, like I said, property taxes is only part of it, but I would say definitely income taxes would be the way to go to get the revenue that the city needs. But I can't emphasize strongly enough that once you have property, it is your property, and you shouldn't have to continue paying for something that is already yours. Because if you don't pay for it, and then somebody else comes to take it, well, then you realize it's not really yours. So when you have to pay for something to keep it, you don't really own it, you just possess it temporarily. And there's a big difference between owning something and possessing it. And people in this city, they don't own their homes, they possess their homes. And if they don't keep on paying, they realize that there's a big difference between ownership and possession. And I think people don't realize that. It's true.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's true. So abolishing property taxes would be a very good thing, and it's already plausible in many countries.
Thank you. Ellen Murphy from 75 Livingston Street.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I wish I had some suggestions that you'd never thought of that could solve this problem tonight.
We wish you had those too.
You may, you never know.
I am the president of the board of a co-op that's a block from here at the corner of Court and Livingston Street.
Oh, yeah.
It was a building built in 1927, was originally one of the homes of the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce and was converted to a co-op in 1982. We have 95 apartments now, mostly 1 and 2 bedrooms. Most of our people who live there are hardworking professionals, are people who are retirees, and many of them have lived there since the building became a co-op in 1982. Since we see all of their financial information when they're moving in or when they're refinancing a mortgage, I can assure you there are no millionaires who live there, and we don't have any apartments that are not owner-occupied. Our real estate tax bill is 40%, between 40 and 45% of our annual budget. And buying a building into a building that is as old as ours means that we're subject to local law 11. In the years that we have had the building, we have spent more than $10 million in facade restoration work. That money had to come as a result of special assessments, partially because of the real estate tax load that we have. Our maintenance increases for the last 10 years have been a total of 23.8%. During the same period of time, our real estate tax assessments have increased by almost 30%. So, as I said, I wish that I had wonderful suggestions. All I can say to you is that we really need to fix the system so that co-ops and condos are not paying more than their fair share, and equity demands that. I would also just like to say that I do think that more notice would be necessary. I didn't find out about this hearing until Friday when I got an urgent email from the Condo and Co-op Association of New York, and that's the reason I'm here tonight with just one piece of paper instead of testimony. Thank you very much. Yes.
They've testified before us on 3 other hearings, so they're spreading the word, but thank you for coming. How much would you say, if you were to sell your property today, it would be worth, and what is your monthly maintenance?
My monthly maintenance is $1,100. I have a 1-bedroom apartment, less than 1,000 square feet, and it would probably sell in today's market for somewhere in the neighborhood of $500,000.
How much?
$500,000.
And you said was 40% or 50% of your maintenance is going to taxes?
Anywhere between 40 and 45% of our maintenance is for real estate taxes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Mary Ann Rothman. Mary Ann. We've, we have heard from you. We would like to hear from you again, but if you want to just submit your testimony, we will certainly understand.
I will be very, very brief. My name is Mary Ann Rothman. I'm the Executive Director of the Council of New York Cooperatives and Condominiums.
Speak up.
I also live in a housing cooperative which next month will celebrate its 50th anniversary as a housing cooperative. And we were the first people to buy in at market prices after the building went co-op. I've chatted with you before and have told you that the Council of Co-ops would like to see all forms of home ownership assessed in a uniform way and subject to the same taxes, mitigated by overlays, circuit breakers that would take care of, that would give a lot of credit for primary residency, for seniors, for people with disabilities, for particular energy improvements, for example, to the building, et cetera. So on Thursday in the Bronx, I was asked why 2 classes of property, why not just 1 class of property? So you forced me to do a lot of thinking over the weekend, Mr. Rajewski.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, me too. And my answer is still a little bit wishy-washy. You are much more experienced than I, and I would be very receptive to looking at a one-class solution, but it seems to me there's still such a distinction between residential property where the citizens live and commercial property that does the business of the city that I think, I can't see my way beyond a 2-class system, but I'm happy to have an open mind. And again, I thank you for holding these hearings. I would suggest a system where people behind could hear better in the future, because it's been a little frustrating today, but I think these hearings have been very valuable already, and I look forward to your report. Thank you.
Marion, let me ask you, because I was struck by Ms. Murphy's comment that of the 95 apartments, they are all owner-occupied. And I wonder, does the Co-op and Condo Association have any notion of how many co-ops and condos in New York City are not owner-occupied?
Oh, there are a tremendous amount of co-ops and condos that have where the conversion has never been completed, because they were non-eviction conversions, there are lots and lots of rental units.
But you have those data and you could give those to us?
I wish I did. But the Department of Finance comes close to having that now because of the primary residency requirement.
Right. Okay. Okay. Any data that you all have to truth test that would be helpful.
Yeah.
So, okay.
We do have that information.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Ms. Edwina Glasgow. Well, thank you for being here. VJ, I can't quite read the handwriting. I think it's Dandapani. Thank you.
Okay, good evening. Thank you. I'm Vijay Dandapani, the Hotel Association of New York. We have over 300 hotels in New York City. I've met many of you before, certainly those sitting in front.
Sorry,
I'm here.
hotels?
I'm sorry?
Hotels.
Yeah, Hotel Association of New York City. We have over 300 hotels, or nearly 300 hotels, I should say, with about 50,000 employees. Many of our hotels are in Manhattan, but quite a few here in Brooklyn, and that's why I'm here. Their issues with real property taxes are similar to those in Manhattan. In a nutshell, property taxes have been going up every year since the Great Recession, while profitability has been down. Unlike other members of Class 4, I was listening with interest your questions with regard to Class 4. We're the only member of Class 4 that not only do we keep our property taxes, as Councilmember Deutsch said, of residential buildings, but we also keep our employees. We pay our employees, and furthermore, we're the only member of the class that pays other taxes. So cumulatively, the total tax that we pay is nearly $2 billion. That includes sales tax, occupancy tax, and property taxes. And so I was also very interested to hear that NYU and Columbia pay nothing. So in contrast, this is our contribution. And most importantly, we've not laid off employees. There have seldom been hotel closures, but the industry is in crisis. And one of the reasons is that there were a lot of new hotels that have been built, of course. But we've also got a huge inventory, including in Brooklyn, of vacant homes being put to other uses, sometimes illegal uses and illegal hotel uses. So what does that do to us? It does not allow us to get our rates where they could be. They're almost 20% lower than where they were pre-recession, and that applies to Brooklyn hotels as well. And while as I said, operating costs have gone up, real property taxes today are almost 15% of our total revenue. We've certainly used the tax tertiary process. We appeal, and those are individual hotels that do that, but across the board, profitability is down, and we have another trap that I think one of the others who testified, when you can't meet your real property taxes, you leave the city and go. Our owners cannot sell because of a local law 50 that says you cannot convert more than 20% of your rooms if you have greater than 150 rooms into an alternative use. In the past, that used to be done. There are many hotels that became something else. The Dorset, for instance, is now part of the Museum of Modern Art, and other buildings have been converted back into hotels. That's been the ebb and flow of this industry that has now been circumscribed. So I just thank you all for your time. I just wanted to bring up the issue of hotels and the fact that we have employees who live and work in Brooklyn, in Manhattan, Queens, Bronx, and of course Staten Island as well. Thank you.
Commissioner
If I could
Parrott.
ask a question.
Oh, certainly, sir.
What's the current state of New York City law regarding conversions of hotels to condos?
Well, the law was passed in 15 and it was renewed in 17, and there was, it's supposed to sunset at the middle of next year in June, but it was supposed to sunset in June 17 and it got renewed.
When was it first enacted?
2015.
2015. And that restricts the conversion completely?
Well, you can only convert 20% of your rooms to some other use. I mean, that's, neither here nor there. So if you have 150 rooms, you can convert 30 rooms into condominiums and still keep 120 as hotels.
So if that law expired, what do you think would happen to?
Well, some hotel owners would sell. I mean, I know of hotel owners who want to sell right now, just like homeowners who, with high taxes, are moved south. They try to do it, or convert it to some other use.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And if you could submit written testimony, giving us some examples of where you think the assessments are, are problematic. that
Most
would be
certainly.
helpful.
I have written testimony which we will be submitting.
Thank you.
Thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Miyako Kato. No, going once? Okay. Linda Cantorino.
Ms. Cantorino? Linda, we may be mispronouncing, so.
Cantorino, no. Angela Riccio Spence. Great. Hello.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know that I have a small two-family house in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn.
Mhm.
And I'm recently retired, and my son lives downstairs, and I don't collect any rent. And I was just wondering, about the taxes. They went up to, they more than doubled. It's $67.36 a year. And, it's the tax rate that's pretty high. I think that's the problem here, And also, I wanted to tell you that, the property value, and it was $775,000, and it changed less 67,000. So now it's 708. It's down to 708. So, I was wondering, and they keep raising the taxes all the time,
So that would be a question that would be good to direct to the DOF folks who are outside in the lobby. They can look up your building and try to give you some explanation.
Oh, I
Okay?
see.
Okay?
Thank you
But we
very
will-
much.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Before you run out there, how much are houses like yours selling for in your neighborhood?
I guess around 775, 800,000.
Okay,
And
thank
they're
you.
small houses attached, so,
Just trying to get the relative values and taxes.
oh, I see, all right. Well, even though they changed my, the property value went down, so I assumed they should lower the taxes instead of raising them.
So you mentioned it doubled. Was that just in 1 year? Even so?
No, they
oh,
doubled, so when I first bought the house, it was 2,900.
Okay,
I said, and now the tax is more than doubled.
got it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
David Weinkrantz. Okay, I'll try it.
Going once?
Going once, going twice. That's
David
it.
Weinkrantz.
Weinkrantz.
There is.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Did I get nowhere near that, sir?
Good evening. My name is David Weinkrantz. I
Weinkrantz.
live in downtown Brooklyn. The housing affordability crisis has been going on for a long time. The political economist Henry George wrote about the same phenomenon back in 1878-9 in his classic book, Progress and Poverty. He recognized that increase in population and economic activity would increase the price of land and give landholders a huge capital gain while making housing unduly expensive for working people. George devised a plan to solve the problem. He proposed a land tax of sufficient size to transfer the profit generated by the popular demand for a limited supply of land from landlords to the public treasury. In 1886, he ran as a candidate for the mayor of New York City, in which post he planned to implement his plan. Unfortunately, he lost to the corrupt Tammany Hall candidate. Theodore Roosevelt, the future president, came in third. It's not too late. We can still enact George's program and thereby provide for public needs while lowering or eliminating taxation on non-landowners. I recommend that the New York City Property Tax Commission increase the tax on land. This will provide revenue for the general good while lowering the market value of land, which would make it more accessible to more people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Howard Feldberg.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So I'm a condo owner in downtown Brooklyn. The average single-family home is about 3 times larger than my space. I pay over 4 times the average single-family home in downtown Brooklyn in property taxes. The methodology for how property taxes are calculated is, dare I say, arbitrary and capricious. But at the same time, as members of the committee pointed out, as this gentleman rightly pointed out, the mandate for this commission is to remain revenue neutral. So I believe there should be an ease on my tax burden. But I have a problem saying anybody else should have to pay more. I understand there is a balancing act. But at the same time, what's being said is we all have to stick together as Brooklyners and as New Yorkers and tighten our belts and work together in this esprit de corps. But I'm going to express this as a rhetorical question through you to the mayor. How do you have equality and fairness with a bottom line and mandating that he keeps his revenue stream? Perhaps the mayor should also tighten his belt and understand that there are essential services and there are elective programs and elective services and expensive programs that only he seems to want. So while I think the amount of property tax that I and some of my neighbors and other residents of condos pay is completely out of whack with single-family owners. I also don't think it's incumbent on all homeowners to provide the revenue that just continues to increase, and perhaps some tightening of the belt of the city is in order as well. Thank you for your time.
Sir?
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
What would the market value of your house be, and how much taxes are you paying?
Respectfully, sir, I appreciate why you want to know that, and I'm in a room full of lovely New Yorkers, and lovely New Yorkers I don't particularly know. So that's why I gave the difference between my neighborhood single-family home versus my condo, but I would prefer not to use exact numbers.
Okay, thank you.
It is a matter of public record, though, you don't realize.
Of course it is, but I don't have to make it too easy.
Yeah, of course.
Understood.
We understand.
Understood.
Thank you. So I'm going to just run through the next 5 people that we're going to call so that you can stay in the room if you're coming up soon. So first is Tricia Lynch, Hirsch Posner, Richard Daskin, Owen Stone, and Joseph Mertz. Ms. Lynch.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tricia Lynch. I'm a 20-year resident of New York City and a 10-year owner of a condo. My reason for being here is to, I guess, call attention to a couple of issues. One is fairness. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment that is 1/3 the size of my brother's townhouse, and I pay 3 times the amount of taxes that he pays. Now, sibling rivalry issues aside.
He's where?
In Fort Greene, and I'm in Borough Hill. So it's just not fair. So I call your attention to that. The difference between a freestanding home, which you can argue a brownstone is not actually freestanding, but a freestanding home and a condo, maybe there were historical reasons, but I've lived in my apartment for 10 years, and unless I get a job in some other city, I plan on living there. So that's not fair. The other thing I want to highlight is simple. I've got my tax statement, and I'd be damned if I could tell you what I'm going to owe in taxes this year. The one thing that's missing on this statement is actually what you owe. There's a lot of math, there's a lot of values, but what you owe is left to your own math. Why not just write down what we owe on this piece of paper? That would be great. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Hirsch Posner. Thank you, ma'am.
Hi, good evening. My name is Hirsch Posner. I'm a 26-year-old resident in the Borough Park of Brooklyn. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment with my wife and 3 children. I'm here tonight on behalf of myself, a resident within the community, and I'm looking to purchase a home in New York City. On behalf of my friends and family, many of them are already property owners, and they are facing this affordability crisis to live in New York City. It's very hard for many large families and fast-growing families, many of them low income, to afford a property in Brooklyn. I'm here to ask from the Advisory Commission to take into consideration the challenges our community is facing. By us in the Hasidic community, we have very fast-growing, large families with many children. We therefore require large apartments with many bedrooms. That being said, in Borough Park, as in many other neighborhoods, every single or 2-family home is being developed into 6 to 8 family houses, condos, and they're being rated as a Class 2 taxes, where each apartment, each floor would pay $10,000 to $12,000, $15,000 for each floor, when originally the 1-family house would pay a total of $10,000 to $12,000. This is making many families that struggling to pay their mortgage and regular living expenses. After all of this, they still have a second mortgage, which is the taxes to New York City. I therefore ask from the Advisory Commission to take this into consideration to help these challenges and crisis by considering to rate the 4 to 8 family houses as a Class 1 and not in Class 2 as the luxury taxes. That will reduce their taxes drastically, and to consider to rate all, even the 3, 4, or 5, 6 family houses as if it would be on the property before it was developed, a 1 or 2 family, and we shouldn't get more and more expensive every year. This crisis is keeping back a lot of the middle class income from affording to live in New York City and in Brooklyn particularly. I hope that the Advisory Commission will take this into consideration, and I thank you in advance for it.
Thank you, Mr. Posner. Mr. Richard Daskin. Richard Daskin? Owen Stone. Oh, that's you. I'm sorry.
My name is Richard D. Caesar. That may have been my handwriting.
Sounds good.
Go ahead. I'm not sure. That doesn't look like...
Richard de Cesare, you will be in a few, okay?
Okay. Is there a Richard Daskin? No. Owen Stone.
Good evening. Thank you for having us here tonight. My name is Owen Stone, and for 8 years and 9 tentative assessment roles, I was the press secretary for the New York City Department of Finance. And every year, starting in August or September, I would meet at least weekly with the senior assessors to try to understand what was going to happen next year, what changes we were making, and what impact they would have for property owners. I also sat in a lot of meetings where commissioners, at least 3 of them, would ask these same experts what they would do to overhaul the system. Often, if not always, the mandate was to determine how to do this in a revenue-neutral way. These meetings, as I understand it, have been regularly occurring since Stanley Grayson was finance commissioner in the late 1980s. I would humbly suggest that there's no such thing as a revenue-neutral approach to property tax reform. If it is unfair now and we change the system to make it more fair, it means that everyone will have to pay either a little more or a little less. And when the impact is not neutral for anyone at the end of the day, then what good is calling it revenue neutral? You guys would make your jobs way easier if you just did away with that artificial constraint. I also think that we can all agree that assessments for commercial properties should be based on the income method because the value is tied directly to the future income that can be generated by renting or leasing that property. That treatment should also extend to residential properties that are used for income-producing purposes. In the interest of full disclosure, I do own a condo unit in Williamsburg that I rent out in what I can only describe as favorable tax treatment on both property and federal tax level. I realize I may be advocating against myself here. But for people who buy a home to live in, the value is in the sale price of their property. For people who buy a property as an investment vehicle or either to rent out on a full-time basis or as an Airbnb, the value is in the income-producing capacity of the property. They should not be seen as the same thing, even though they may look the same. I understand this may represent an inconvenience for several small landlords. I would also suggest that if a landlord is renting out a property for income and paying taxes on that property, they are every bit as capable of telling the Department of Finance their income and expenses as they are the IRS. Owning a property is a business, and business ownership comes with a lot of responsibilities, but the price of the convenience for a few landlords is not really worth the cost of an unfair system. Also, in keeping with the theme of valuing a property based on its use, it does not make sense, to use a double negative, for a property that is not being used for income-producing purposes to value it as though it was. If a homeowner lives in the property, again, the value is based on their sales price of the property, which is true for co-op and condo owners as it is for single-family homeowners. The same use should have the same treatment. So to sum up, I think there should only be 3 classes of property in New York City. 1, owner-occupied residential. 2, income-producing. And 3, utility specialty properties.
And 3 is what?
Utilities, the class 3 is RUC properties. And if I could just answer his question about the why not reset it on sales to get to the cap, I think the ideal in a fair property tax system would have 2 properties in the same block that look the same or used for the same purpose, have the same value, are taxed the same. If you were to go for a California style where they're resetting on the sales price, you could have wildly different values. which would benefit older, more established, usually white homeowners, and have a disproportionate impact on younger homeowners and people of color.
So you would be in favor of splitting the assessment on a home between the income-producing section and the owner-occupied section?
Yes, similar to how we apportion it on land and physical
Yes,
improvement.
okay, I just
or-
wanted to
yeah.
make sure that I understood what you were saying
Correct.
completely, for all types of property.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just
Okay.
help me here on two things. So what you're suggesting is owner-occupied, three-family home is owner-occupied?
For 1/3 of the
Or
units.
is it 1/3 on sales price and 2/3 on income producing? Is that's a different, that same building is two different classes? Is that the notion?
That building would be apportioned between the two. So part of its property tax value would be based on an income-producing model. Part of it would be based on a sales price. So what is the going rate for a one-bedroom or two-bedroom, three-bedroom home in a particular neighborhood? Apply that to the owner-occupied portion of the property. The income-producing units would be based on the income approach. And we do this, I haven't been the press secretary in like 8 years. They do this, I think, for a lot of buildings where you have some units that are apportioned to condo. They can treat different units within the same building different ways.
I know they're practical concerns, but shouldn't those two methods of assessment and somewhat practical differences that come out, but at least in theory, those two methods of assessment ought to produce approximately the same result? I mean, I just don't see why you need to petition. Usually you petition based upon, the depth of data that'll, that you lack a deep enough market to just to do sales prices, and then you do income where you don't have a deep enough market. I'm just a little confused on this.
I think that if you're going to look at a fair property tax system, you have to tax properties that are used the same way by the same method. So you may come up with a similar value at the end of the day, whether or not you use all three units as a sales price for a particular building, or if you apportion it out, in any way. Yeah. So. Yes.
Well, we have you here. So you have a homeowner in Bensonhurst whose property is worth $800,000 and they're paying $6,000 a year in taxes. And then you have somebody in Red
Don't
Hook-
tell anyone in Westchester.
What's that?
Don't tell anyone in Westchester.
Or you have somebody in Williamsburg who, or Park Slope or Red Hook, whose property is worth $1.5 million and they're paying $3,500 in taxes. How do we make that fairer?
What types of properties are these?
Single family, class
So
one property.
if you're just talking about the cap issue, then I would phase in the caps, changes over 20, 30 years, 50 years, however long you think it makes sense to have an incremental increase in or decrease in people's property tax liabilities.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Mr. Joseph Mertz. Joseph Mertz, is that? He's coming. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Am I too close or too far?
If you're too far, if you could move it up
How's
a little
that?
bit. Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Briefly, I'm here for two reasons. One is that I just had lost my senior abatement by virtue of being in the hospital and coming out and looking through stacks of papers. Didn't find that until too late. And by the time I applied, they informed me that it had evaporated. So I'm in the process of
Have you talked to anybody outside?
I did.
From the Department
I
of
got very
Finance?
good help here.
See, they help
Yeah.
you? Okay.
Very wonderful. And so I'm in the process right now because of being here, of getting the right help, and also from one of the places in Manhattan, over at the street. So that's being being taken care of, and I trust I will be back because it's very expensive. I didn't realize the cost. We're paying right now on our house, which is, we built it
I'm
in
sorry,
19
we're not able to
Yeah,
hear you. Can
we built our house in what's now called Brooklyn Heights in 1965. And it was, of course, at that time, you know, frontier land, an unusual thing to do. My wife and I are both architects, and so we were very interested in doing something special for ourselves and for 2 other clients. It's been published, by the way. Anyway, I wanted to say something about the city, generally speaking, and the problem. When we moved in 1965 with 4 children, we had a studio on the top floor. The street was filled with young kids playing outdoors, roller skating, throwing things, so on, footballs, baseballs. That doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. And you find that in most of New York City, I think. True. Parties, you know, playing an instrument in the street. I've noticed, for example, talking to people who are reluctant to talk about it, but they can't pay their taxes because it used to be a blue-collar neighborhood. Those areas that are still really alive and have life in them, normal kind of life for families, are disappearing. And I think that's the tragedy, as we see as an architect and planner. These buildings going up, which are, you know, New York Times, Sunday, look at it, millions of dollars. And the question in my mind has always been, having worked with some distinguished city planners, what do you do about it? And the truth of the matter is there's very little we can do because we can't plan far ahead. On the other hand, there are various countries in the world, in the Western world particularly, who can manage to do that. But we fail to follow their example. I won't use the names, but they're basically places you can go to and see and feel that the social structure is there still, and they honor it. Families get together in the street and play and talk and cook. That is lacking now. And when I think of people in the poor neighborhoods of Brooklyn or other, but I know Brooklyn very well, that cannot pay their taxes, what do? They're offering lots of money for the house, right? So they can move. And where do they go to? Question.
So.
And now who takes over? People on a higher level. So this is a transcendent question. This is not something that just comes and goes. I lived through the break of 1972, and 87, went from one day to the next. Property went 50% down. And everyone thought they were rolling along, you know.
Right.
So we don't know what's going to happen, but we do know that those things will continue. What I'm more concerned about is seeing if we can't restore in some way the social structure that keeps the family together and living together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Carl Kohler.
Thank you, Commissioners, for giving me the chance to speak. I guess the last time I spoke was in 1986, I guess was how I needed them. We were advocating for 46 family houses. I suppose I already set forth tremendous problems that our civic community have with assessment. The assessment was the way it's set up. It's the assessment, everything's based on apartments. It causes everybody to move. But I'm going to address this.
Sorry.
This part. Commissioner Jackson, so yeah, it's very hard to please the commissioner, but this is something that can take care of it right away. I have to focus in front of me, 1, 2, 3 family homes. There's only 3 classes. There's another class. There's a class of a condo, not a big condo. That's you have to put all classes. The condos are all class 2 or class 4. But we're talking about three family houses, which each of the apartment is coming in. How do you assess that? Does anybody know? Well, the law says what the guy is supposed to do. The law says a couple of places that a condominium, 3 condominiums, and 3 family house is a class 1, and is to be condo and say it's worth $500,000. You gotta make it a regular three-family house and assess it that way, and then divide it by 3. So the Department of Finance is doing that. They pull up, that's the policy. However, a lot of assessors are not doing that. And the most egregious situation is very simple, where you convert. You have a three-family house, which is a class 1, and you convert it into a street-family condominium. Some of the assessors code and start a fresh set of values. So let's say it was capped or caps, and all of a sudden you get $1 million, they're going to start at a higher thing, which is against the law. It's during the Department of Finance is okay. You go to the tax commission, they don't know what you're talking about. They tell you, I'm assessing you based on the values. This is something which you can implement right now. Get the commissioners, the right commissioners, and give them examples and exactly what the law says, and that can be done right away. But the other problem is tax abatement, which of course you have, I guess, I don't know if you have input, but it should be an input. The way our condominiums is basically driving Borough Park. People live in Borough Park, 20% of Borough Park is left already because of this problem. We used to have a tax abatement for very small buildings, and now, not only that, they enacted the tax abatement. When we fought in 1986, what happened was they gave the tax abatements, they started at 6 and higher. We came back and said, what do you mean 6 and higher? The 45% tax rate starts at 4. We were successful, and they changed the abatement to 4, from 4 to 6. They changed that. Now they did it again because we were not presented properly, but we have the same major problem. That tax abatements do not start until 6, and the tax rate starts at 4. So that's, again, I guess it's an Albany change. But everything comes from the city. I remember Mayor Blasio was in our community, and I came to say, why are you discriminating against condominiums? You know that condominiums don't get tax abatement. So he said condominiums are luxury. So what are you luxury? In Borough Park, that's the meat, that's what we live in. And nothing was done. I understand everything has been over, but everything is, and here they said what New York says. So New York has to get behind this thing, so we should be able to manage the city. Because I thank you for giving me a chance to advocate for my community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a quick question. The abatement you're talking about is the abatement that you're talking about. This is one for repairs and improvements?
421.
It was a 421A rather than J51, okay.
It used to be, that's maybe the input, it used to be 421B.
Yes,
That's how we should put it.
Okay,
421B, temporary abatement, 5 years to get the people on the, once they get it, the city get money. But I think it's a simple, I remember speaking to Steve Quinn was in those days, and I said, what are you doing to the smaller one? She says, yeah, well, in that case, I was maybe 6. So I think it's something which the city can advocate. It's a simple solution, it's not a lot of money, and it's helped tremendously our community.
Thank you. Amy Pinkerton.
I think I have a pretty loud voice. Is this good enough?
Oh, terrific.
Okay. I found out about this meeting today. I got an email late Friday from the city council. So I have a few suggestions about how to push that.
Reach out. Yeah.
But I'm here because I'm a co-op owner. I live in South Crown Heights. My apartment is about 675 square feet, unimproved, but no windows. We live on a block that is multi-family homes, with 8 apartment buildings, and the other is about a handful of converted brownstones, or townhouses. We are similarly situated for a rental unit that
appeal. Mhm.
We weren't successful. And you know, there's trade-offs that you have. You said you can fight this further, but they may open it up and you might have to pay for it. So you have to weigh your options and decide what to do. But as you're saying, that we're similarly situated to the building next door. And I think the issue was that we were told we replaced windows, because all of these to be replaced, and the rental building on the same thing. We had elevators that we spent, I think, in 1 6-month period, $40,000 they kept breaking down. People were getting stuck in them. We're a 6-story building, but people were getting stuck in the elevator, so we're calling the fire department, we're being fined. And the kind of maintenance guy says, you cannot get parts of this anymore. You have to replace them, otherwise something tragic is going to happen. So we did the replacement, and we're kind of under the guidance that this is a maintenance, repair issue. And our tax assessment was based on capital improvements that we did, and we assigned the elevators to capital improvements. That's where we got hit really hard with the tax bill. So probably one of the solutions I would have is more about, maybe there are worksheets, maybe there's some sort of, like, literally out there. If you're thinking about doing something for your building, work this worksheet, find out how the city is going to determine whether it's a capital improvement or it's a repair. So you could have, like, literally guidance. Again, we had a lawyer and we had a management company, and they were blindsided. There's no way to do that. But where's things up? Okay. So as far as communications, I was just thinking, my goodness, get a page out of AM New York, Metro New York, take a page ad. Everybody reads those papers on the subway. Just say, hey, we have like this. These are the 5 boroughs, these are the dates. Show up if you want to talk about property tax. Boom, that's done.
Thank you.
Use the kiosks on the street. I mean, just say, hey, we're having a property tax meeting. Blah. You know, people walk by every day. You have them up for millions of dollars. Just put your information up there. And I was saying, like, for let's say a solution for the property tax to be equitable, if you let people know what other people would pay, your half the work is done, because people are going to spend time to find their own comparables and say, hey, look, my place is similar to this place and all these 20 other places, and we have a range that is like 50, 100, 200% difference. If you let people know what people are paying, network, and we have a fair grievance process where they can show up and say, here are my comparables, here's what you're collecting, this is why it's wrong, I want to increase this.
You could go on the Department of Finance website, and you would find, yes, you would find.
Better. It's not fair.
Really?
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, can you provide the address of the co-op?
I'm on Montgomery Street, South Crown Heights, 345 on Montgomery Street.
Thank you.
And the other building I was talking about is 377.
377?
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Richard De Cesare. And I hope I didn't butcher that.
No.
Probably did, but
Thank you very, very
Thank
much
you.
for the opportunity to speak before this commission. I'm the treasurer of a 113-unit residential co-op right here in Cobble Hill. I've been the treasurer for 25 years, which means for a long, long time I've been dealing with frustrated shareholders. One of the things that people are very, very concerned about is the steep increase in property taxes. It is now the single largest item in our operating budget. It comprises 54% of total operating expenses. Of particular concern is the recent trend in the increases. Taxes have grown particularly significantly since 2014. For the 5-year period, 2014 to 2018, they've almost doubled, increasing 86%. In comparison with the previous 5-year period, 2009 through 2013, where they increased 48%. This does not portend well for the future, and I'm very, very concerned about the long-term prospects here. We can't afford to have everybody selling all their units, vacating this wonderful building, which was always a average neighborhood. It just happens to be in a very, very desirable neighborhood. But we are paying more per square foot than the brownstones across the street. And my own particular problem is that we are being taxed the same way as luxury, multi-family rental buildings. There's nothing particularly luxurious about our buildings. We don't really have many amenities aside from elevators, which we break down. So we would be most interested in equitable treatment when it comes to taxation.
Can I ask you, have you experienced turnover during this period that you described, and how much turnover?
There has been some turnover, but 10-15% a year over the last 10 years. So the turnover hasn't been commensurate with the increase in the property taxes. However, given the sharp increase since 2014, if this continues, there will be a change in the number of people moving. I think that's a reasonable.
Yeah. And you haven't had vacancies either for long periods?
Well, we have generally up to about 10 units sold each year.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Karen Lee. Oh, please speak up.
It's turned off.
Yeah, that mic.
Battery went out.
Hi, good evening.
Oh,
Thank you for having me here tonight. The reason I'm here tonight is because I want to talk about my condominium. We purchased a condominium in April 2014, and the property tax was $700. And on February 2015, the property tax went up 900% more. So, which is like we're paying $6,000 per year right now. It's keep increasing, and this year we have to pay $6,800. It's only a 2-bedroom apartment. The problem is that we have 10 units in the condominium, and however, we are paying more than the total of the other 9 apartments. So we have apartment, they pay $700 per year. We have apartment paying $0 per year. And most of the apartment, they're paying only about $200 per year. So our apartment, I understand that we live in the first floor, we have the basement. However, we only have 2 bedrooms. The other apartment, they have 4 bedrooms. They occupy the 3rd and 4th floor. They're only paying $700 per year. So I have been going back and forth. We went to the One Center Manhattan building. We talked to people there in September 21st. And I still haven't heard anything from them yet. And I talked to the advocate. But a lot of time, they just like pointing me different place to go. And I try to figure this out because like eventually our 2-bedroom apartment, it will be $17,980 without a tax abatement. So this is our 4th year, but we are paying $6,800 already. So I'm very concerned about that, and I just want to see if you guys can help me with that. I just like, we are very overwhelming, and I hope that you can help me.
Can you see me after the meeting? Because I'll be very much interested in knowing exactly.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Okay.
That's the reason that I'm here tonight. I have a kid at home. I am running back and forth, and we are
It looks
overwhelmed.
like you have a special situation, so I'd like to see exactly what's going on.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Justin Pollock.
Thank you. I know it's a long night for you guys. My name is Justin Pollock, and I live on Smith Street in downtown Brooklyn. I live in a home I purchased with my wife, a home we are raising our 2 boys, a home we have never rented and never planned to rent. It is also an apartment. It's an apartment in a building with 49 other apartments. It's also officially a condominium. But to me, it's a home. I don't live in an income-producing investment. I live in a home. Why is my home treated any different from someone living in a single-family residence? Or even a home with an income-producing apartment attached? I understand the city's desire to keep single-family homes affordable, but why is it always at the cost of those who live more efficiently in larger buildings? Why, when the city proposes new environmental regulations, do they typically only make medium to large buildings comply? Issues affecting heating, lighting, and other regulations are required of those buildings, large buildings, but not those living in single-family homes. My building has to comply with Local Law 87 for energy efficiency, Local Law 84 regarding energy benchmarking, and Local Law 11 regarding building safety, just to name a few. I understand passing regulations on large buildings has more bang for the buck, but it also passes along the real cost to those living in those homes, costs that single-family homeowners do not share. While I do not oppose improving safety and environmental regulations in the city, I question why they are not imposed on city residents as a whole. And when they are not, these costs are disproportionately affecting those living the most efficiently within the city. Those who live more compact and with less square footage end up paying for these regulations. And this is the same with property taxes. Those of us who live in smaller and more dense buildings end up paying up to 5 times more in property taxes than those living in larger, less dense, single-family homes. I don't want my property taxes to be determined by a formula that assumes it's an income-generating investment. I want it to be treated the same as any other homeowner in the city. It's a home and should be taxed as a home.
Thank you very much. So we're going to, do we need to take a break immediately, or are we going to hear from Councilmember? I know, but we're out of batteries for the camera, so we have to just put in a new battery. So let me tell you who's coming up right after that. So we're going to take a very quick break to change the calendar. No, the camera. Then we're going to hear from Councilmember Brad Lander. We're going to hear from Steve. I think it's Cut Comedy. I'm not sure. Rabbi David Niederman, Sarah Nerdman, Leslie Jenkins, Sharman Rahman, Janice Hamilton, Rabbi Eli Cohen, Stephanie Eisenberg, Sandra Linenschmidt, Nancy Schur, Avi Greenstein, and Jessica Franco. So we will take as quick a break as we can, change that camera, and reconvene in just 5 minutes.
Services, dial 311.
I'm Commissioner Greg Bishop of the New York City Department of Small Business Services. Do you need help signing, renewing, or resolving some other issue with a business lease in New York City? You may be eligible for free legal services. For more information, call 311 and ask for commercial lease assistance or visit nyc.gov/SBS. That's nyc.gov/SBS.
This is New York City Comptroller Scott Stringer. As the city's chief fiscal officer, I can tell you that women and minority-owned businesses are critical to New York. These businesses hire locally, buy locally, and they help us be a true...
On the MTA, we used to go to 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning.
Remember, for more information about New York City government services, dial 311 or visit nyc.gov.
They do the work few ever see and fight for kids and families most of us never hear about. They're the ones who answer the call for help when a loving mom can't afford food, when addiction, domestic violence, or mental health issues turn a family upside down, even when new parents need a crib so their newborn can sleep safe. When our city's kids and families need help, Child Protective Specialists are there. Learn more about Child Protective Specialists at nyc.gov/CPS.
This is Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer. On Saturday, September 29, 2018, is a conference to improve academic outcomes for men and boys of color called My Brother's Keeper. The conference is inviting all Manhattan parent leaders and student leaders to attend. Call the Manhattan Borough President's Office at 212-669-8300 to get information.
Remember, for more information about New York City government services, dial 311.
Hello, I'm Buildings Commissioner Rick Chandler. Construction safety is our top priority to protect both workers and the public. Starting this spring, most construction workers will need to have approved safety training or they will not be able to work. For more information, please visit nyc.gov/DOB. Working together, we will build our city safely. Thank you.
Inspired by a letter sent to the New York City Commission on Human Rights.
I was always in a good mood. Then it happened.
My coworker approached me from the back, grabbed me, and pressed down on my shoulders hard.
I tried to get away, but he pressed down on me even harder.
Does your husband please you like this? Does he get you excited?
There is no excuse.
This is sexual harassment, and New York City is ready to help and fight for you.
Call 718-722-3131 or visit nyc.gov/humanrights.
Remember, for more information about New York City government services, dial 311 or visit nyc.gov.
If you work at any business or nonprofit, you have the right to save and seek leave. Use it to seek help or take other safety measures for any act or threat of domestic violence, unwanted sexual contact, stalking, or human trafficking. Or use it for care and treatment when sick. Call 311 or visit.
If we could reconvene, Councilmember Lander will speak to us first. If people can take their seats, we'd very much appreciate it. Councilmember.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair Bean. To you and to this commission, I want to say a big thank you. There are some thankless tasks in public service, but you really have agreed to do a thankless but a very important task. And I really want to give credit to the people that are still out here tonight and are going to be here late into the night.
Yes.
It's meaningful that people care about this, that they've come out. I feel proud that the council and the mayor have seen how important this is, and even with no certainty about where it goes and about what we get from the state, that we know it's on us to really look at it. And the fact that you guys are willing to step up to that task and stay here as volunteer public servants late into the evening, I really give credit. So thank you for doing it.
Thank you.
So I am a New York City Council member from Park Slope. I own a 2-family home on 13th Street between 4th and 5th, and my neighbors and I are undertaxed. It's pretty straightforward. It didn't happen, I think, for nefarious reasons. It happened for logical reasons over the year. We want to have a city that doesn't dramatically hike people's taxes from year to year. And so we put some restraints on to keep it, because the value of my home has gone up much more rapidly than my income has. And that is true for almost all of my neighbors. Some of them are on fixed incomes, but even those who aren't, the values of our homes have risen much more dramatically than our incomes. We could not have kept up with a property tax rate that was neatly pegged to the value of our homes. Many of us would then be underwater. But the fact is that has happened, and now our homes have risen in value dramatically, and as a result, we are undertaxed, and we are going to need to find a way that balances those things, that on the one hand achieves more fair and appropriate taxation, but that also recognizes that there are people on fixed incomes and others who couldn't possibly pay if the taxes had gone up. Now, there are some fairly straightforward solutions here, and I know you're looking at them. Resetting those tax rates on sale of property seems like at least one very straightforward idea. Plenty of people in our neighborhood in Park Slope, when they go to sell their properties, or if they live there the rest of their lives, when their estate or their children go to sell their properties, will be able to sell something that has much more value than what they bought it for. And if the value of it were diminished a bit on sale, because the next buyer knew that they were going to have to pay taxes at the value of the property, that seems like a fair way to adjust something here in a way that then helps to address many of the issues that people in the audience are here, because the consequence of our collectively being undertaxed is that a different set of people are overtaxed, and it has some perverse incentives in the system that you have been hearing. I have other constituents who are in condos and co-ops and multifamily rentals, and who should not be on the unequal side of this system. So it's not going to be easy for you guys to figure out how to balance those things, but I do want to let you know that even in some neighborhoods, folks who have benefited from the system that we have set up, if we can come up with a fair and thoughtful way to do it, will be supportive of a restructuring that achieves more equity in our system.
I'd like to ask you a question, because you're not the first person who's raised the issue of revaluing at sale. And if you look around the whole country, that's happened in certain places. But the one thing it doesn't bring you is equal treatment of equal properties. As a matter of fact, it becomes more unequal. You have two houses side by side, and just by accident of one sale, they end up in quite different places. And so I'm asking you, you're a representative, is that something you think people can live with as more fair than the existing system, for example, which we know is not, which we know has problems, right?
I think so, yes. I mean, there's not going to be a perfect solution here. And I think between what we have now, which distributes that unfairness in a whole set of ways you're hearing, that this one is better and more appropriate. You know, folks like me, you know, we'll wind up seeing that reduction. It'll get capitalized into the reduction in sale price when we get there. Over time, things will reset in a way which is more fair than it is today. You're right, it's imperfect, but I don't know that we don't have a solution, especially we've got a lot of retired people, we've got a lot of older people. I don't see how we could do something that brought people up to an appropriate level amongst my constituents without sinking a whole lot of them in ways that we would also feel were unfair.
Well, you could relieve them of, I mean, you could try to relieve them of the payment burden, all right? You could still assess the property fairly and then begin to relieve them of the payment burden through circuit breakers and a whole bunch of other mechanisms.
My
correct?
hunch is that those mechanisms would be pretty difficult to employ, that trying to figure out at what income level, at what fixed income level, how related to what was a reasonable expectation when they bought the home, would just get very complicated very quickly. And
so.
No?
Okay, no. But we'll talk about it, but thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Commissioner Parrott.
Thank you, Councilman Lander, for being here, and thanks for your kind words for the commission at the outset. So it sounds like you're talking about a system, a transition that would only occur when property is sold, and that you wouldn't have, for those properties that are undertaxed now, that you wouldn't have any adjustment until that time. Is that correct?
Well, obviously, my taxes go up every year. It's not like there's no adjustment. The property value, when you get a situation, as you know, when the value of your home is substantially higher than the base that it's taxed on, it is rising every year. It's just we've chosen to restrain that in ways that make it so that people don't see giant jumps that they can't afford because their incomes don't go up as fast as the value of their homes. Whether those should be tweaked modestly, I'm open to the possibility that they should be tweaked modestly, but that principle makes sense to me. Most New Yorkers, if they're in a neighborhood where property values are increasing, are not seeing their incomes go up nearly as fast, and they couldn't possibly keep up if we did just let it go. And so the idea that we keep those values restrained during the period of that home buyer seems reasonable to me.
So on the other side, for those properties that are overtaxed now, what sort of mechanisms do you envision to provide relief for those? And understanding in a context where you have to be revenue neutral overall, if you're going to restrain the properties that are increased, how are you going to, you're also going to restrain those that receive relief?
Well, first, my thinking was that you'd have enough people come before you saying, we are unfairly overtaxed, that you'd be grateful to have some people come and say, we are undertaxed.
We are grateful.
And we are willing to, under an appropriate and thoughtful and fair approach, pay more. And that is what this is. Like I think I just proposed that the values of the homes of my constituents be diminished by actions that I support and that you propose. So like, I know that's not a small thing to come before you and say. And so anyway, how to do it is complicated. So how you should redistribute that value, I guess what I would say is, look, we are in a system where on the one hand there's a lot of unfairness, and on the other hand everyone is taxed this year at what they were taxed this year. And so how we get a bit fairer as we move forward is the right answer. And I don't know that, I mean, a system that tomorrow was like radically equalizing, on the one hand would put cash in some people's pockets that they would be delighted to have because they don't have it right now. And on the other hand, would lead to a whole lot of people getting their homes foreclosed on because their property tax bills would be beyond this year's or next year's ability to pay. So yes, I guess I think it's fair that this system go into effect gradually in a way that starts to receive more from people who are undertaxed. And how to distribute it, I think there's some interesting principles. You're hearing from people who, you know, when they hit the end of their 421A, see a massive spike or increase. So directing some of the relief to places where we fear if we don't do it, we might wind up leading to foreclosures or giant spikes. That would seem fair. Those folks who have been at that level and we want to take it down modestly, that it gets distributed over time as new properties pay higher taxes.
Councilmember, let me ask you some leading questions in favor of your proposal.
Oh, thank you.
First, with the proposal you made on resets, does that cost the city money or add to the money the city has?
Is it what?
Definitely adds to the money the city has.
So it's revenue positive.
Yes.
Gives you some resources you can do other things with, given our mandate. Secondly, you've gone through Emma's talks on class shares and the 4 class rates many times.
He's a good teacher.
What would it do to class 1's tax rate if we reset the rate so that the assessed value and total assessed value in class 1 is going up, but its class share is not going up?
Right, which should reduce the rate.
So everybody in the class would see a lower tax rate, which would benefit some of the people who are now being hit. And there would be some extra revenue to the city, which could then be applied to some of the other problems that we have. Is that what the proposal would do?
Exactly.
There we go.
Commissioner Capelli.
No,
Did you have?
I'm good now. Thank you.
So you are quite right that at reset, there would be some hit to property value because the taxes that the person would be buying to pay would increase. However, the appreciation would not be wiped out by that, right? The
Correct.
hit would. So a different solution would be take into account that we shouldn't be putting anybody out of their house or understanding that their incomes are not going up as much as the appreciation, we could defer those taxes until the sale of the apartment or the home, so that would come out of some of the appreciation as well. So can you respond to that idea?
I'm open to that idea. I mean, I think some modeling would be important, and I'll speak frankly, like on, and it obviously depends when you bought your home and how much appreciation there's been. In my neighborhood, where a lot of us bought our homes a good long time ago and have seen really significant appreciation, there's room to do that in ways that would nowhere near wipe out the appreciation. And, I could imagine situations where you'd want to build in a formula that that was fair up in advance and also protected people from, winding up underwater on sale. But I think it's a fair idea to explore for sure.
Well, we thank you very much.
Thank you again very much for
ideas
doing
and
this. Thanks everyone for
here.
being out here tonight.
So, we called Mary Ann Young once before, but I think she was out of the room, so. Oh, I'm sorry, we just didn't, I apologize, but you were earlier in the queue, so please come up.
I'm just wanting to thank you guys for this tremendous task that you guys can be dealing with. And I understand about fairness, and I understand about paying my due share, but I asked that you look at me as one example, as an individual who owned my 450 square foot condominium for over 20 years, and now paying over $4,000 in a year in taxes and on that. And I'm like, wow, that is a tremendous jump for me, especially when I'm earning less than $30,000 a year. So just consider the fairness in that place. Even though I live in a very luxury place, Carroll Gardens has jumped up. It used to be a red line district and called Red Hook, and now it's like you can't even afford to live there. And even if I sold my place, I would never be able to find another place to live in. And that is my home. It has been my home, and that Owen guy gave a beautiful, beautiful rendition of what I had felt, that this is my home. I live there. I love to live there for the rest of my life, and I don't even think of selling it, but I can't afford the high taxes that are going up. Yeah. Thank you so much, very much for your...
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry, I can't read this writing, but I think it's Steve, CTCMITY, at 115 Ashland Place. Does that help?
Steve from Ashland Place.
Steve. Could be a hit TV show. Steve from Ashland Place. No? Okay, we will. Rabbi David Niederman.
Good evening. I share the sentiments, and I echo that what our dear councilman said, the thankless job that you are doing. Nobody's going to be happy. But let me say one thing. It's a very important job. I am the executive director and president of the United Jewish Organizations of Williamsburg. Let me say that I'm here to point out a huge problem, how the Department of Finance applies the formulas, okay? This can and must be fixed administratively. I know there are issues, class 1, class 2, that's the state, but here is something that must be done. The formula is based on comparable rental buildings. The market value for the condos should be consistent with the value of the comparable rental buildings. However, our research demonstrates that the formula clearly is not working in Central Williamsburg, and I'm sure it's not working in some outer boroughs as well. And very hardworking middle-income families can't afford the taxes that they are assessed. And let me give you an example. We found in this booklet, which reads unjust adjustments, which I will share with you soon, okay? condos that are over 3 times of their comparable average market value. Non-luxury condos in our neighborhoods that are compared to the same set of comparables, yet one condo ended up with a market value of $184 per square foot, and over 3 times its comparables, while the other was valued at $83 per square foot, 1.34 times its comparables. How is that possible when you have the same comparables? In general, when reviewing the listings of the condos comparables by DOF, we found that in average, Central Williamsburg condos were adjusted 46% higher than the comparable rentals. It's almost double of the luxury market condos in North Williamsburg that are only valued at about 3/4 of their average comparables. These findings, an example you will find over here. In Williamsburg, many of the families are taxed annually, not at $4,000, but at $18,000, and some close to $30,000. Again, for a non-luxury family unit, okay? And it really threatens. Folks spoke about foreclosure. This is, God forbid, going to happen in families. You'll be seeing families with 8 and 10 kids have no place where to call home. When meeting with the DOF, the response was that aggrieved families can appeal. But how could they appeal if you don't give them the tools how to do it? We do not understand the formula. And we sat meetings, we brainstormed, some council members and representatives who were here could not get to it. And let me just say, it was told that is a work product. I understand it's a work product, but it's a work product. I mean, we, the taxpayers, are entitled. That's our work product. And I respectfully request that this commission, and I commend the mayor and the speaker for convening this, to give us, we ask only one thing. We are taxed. We are ready to pay our share, our fair share. Help us know what our fair share is. Let there be a very clear formula that anybody and everybody doesn't have to spend thousands of dollars to go to that professionals, and the next year you have to go again to that professional. That has to stop. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you. So you'll put the document into the portal, right? You'll
Yes.
put thank you. Commissioner? No, okay. Leslie Jenkins.
Hello, thank you for holding this hearing. I am going to speak to a different kind of building than we've been speaking about. In 1980, I moved to Brooklyn because my rents were getting too high in Manhattan. I bought a wreck of a building in what is now a little bit expanded Park Slope. 3 years of sweat equity, we moved in. That's my home, echoing the people that are talking about homes. And I think we should think very, very clearly about the fact that our neighborhoods are losing their character. Now, I have one of those boomerang kids that came home after college. I was smart enough to buy a building that had I made it into 3 one-bedroom apartments. It had been an SRO and a storefront. Mm-hmm. And I love my tenants. I love my storefront tenant. It's my home. It's my community. And my taxes are going to slowly march up. And depending on what you do, they'll march up a little longer. Now, we have an administration in power in City Hall that talks about affordable housing. Let's save our neighborhood characters. You know, it's like they're different. Each neighborhood has a character. Now, let's think about what might stabilize neighborhoods. Now, maybe it might be that the people who have lived there a long time can afford to continue to live there. And so maybe something you should take into consideration is how long an owner has owned the particular unit they're living in, whether it's a house or a condo or whatever. And yes, that produces inequality between this building or this condo or that condo. But it preserves neighborhood character, it preserves affordability. My second floor tenant is now moving out. They've been there for 6 years. He got married, he's moving out because they're having a baby and a one-bedroom is too small for them. In that 6 years, I raised their rent $5 because they're wonderful tenants. And I like them. I like saying hello to them. My storefront tenant, I had really horrible tenants, and I've only been able to rent that storefront for the last 15 years. Well, this one I went after. I found a nice man that ran a coffee shop in Long Island City and said, how'd you like to open one in Park Slope? He's a big part of my life. I like having him there. I'm never going to raise his rent so he has to move out. My daughter's there. She got married this summer. They're still there. I'm hoping they'll stay there forever. And they do think it might be handy to have grandma next door.
Right.
So, you know, there I am, second generation in this neighborhood. And as far as being revenue neutral, who needs to be revenue neutral? Bring back the commuter tax. That will solve everything. Tax the people that aren't in their apartments in Manhattan. Manhattan is looking more and more like Vail, Colorado or something. You know, you look up at the buildings that used to be populated, and 80% of the windows are dark during the evening time when those people should be at home. They're not building community. Now, I'm lucky enough to have retained a commercial studio that was always like used as an artist studio, still is, in Manhattan, Lower Manhattan. And the monthly maintenance on that in 5 months is more than I paid to buy that unit. I was the first to buy in that building because the man I lived with had a writing studio there and we wanted him to continue to have it there. And it's just, I don't know what the answers are, but it's just, there's got to be a different answer for revenue, and there's got to be a different answer for preserving the character of our neighborhoods and building community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Sarah Nordman.
Hi, my name is Sarah Nordman, and I'm the Executive Director of the Atlantic Avenue Business Improvement District. We are a nonprofit that supports the business community along the Atlantic Avenue corridor between the BQE and 4th Avenue. Recently, our board of directors has expressed concerns about the retail vacancy crisis affecting New York City as a whole and our avenue specifically. Our board is composed of 31 people, a majority of which own property in the corridor, and some of whom also own businesses, and then others who own businesses and rent, and then some renters, and anyway, property and business owners mainly. Let's see, some board directors have raised concerns about the impact of property taxes on commercial rents and vacancy rates. And I'm operating here from my belief and my board's belief that a vibrant commercial corridor contributes to the neighborhood. No one wants to see stores empty long-term. The vast majority of buildings in our area are mixed use with residential units above small store spaces, and they are income producing. However, there are instances of substantially similar buildings next door to each other with vastly different property taxes levied on them. Property owners must cover their expenses while simultaneously responding to market forces for setting rental rates. Leases for commercial units often stipulate that the tenant pay a portion of the property's taxes, which can vary year by year. It appears that the high variation in the amount of assessed taxes may be contributing to the elevated vacancy rate in two ways. When the taxes are unusually high on a given building, the landlord may hold out for a higher rent to better cover her expenses. When the taxes are comparatively low relative to other buildings, the landlord may not have sufficient economic incentive to compel her to place the retail unit on the market, since the costs are covered by the apartments above. Furthermore, we understand that the property taxes for Class 2 and 4 properties are based in part on the estimated gross income, or the RPIE that's filed. If a unit in a building or a quarter of a neighborhood suffers from high vacancy and thus lower income, it doesn't seem like there's a mechanism for the property taxes to be lowered to reflect that, unless eventually the sales price of all the neighboring buildings goes down on average. I'll be happy to submit some specific examples in my written testimony, and I look forward to hearing the Commission's findings. It certainly is a complex issue that we're trying to sort through.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You'll submit this in writing? You'll submit it?
Yes.
Yeah, great.
It would be helpful if we could get a sense from your 31 board members of how many of the leases pass the taxes on to the retail tenants, in what proportion. Okay, that would be very helpful to
Sure,
us.
I don't have that data currently, but I could send out
Sure.
an email and check on that.
Thank you. Sharman Rahman? Sharman Rahman? Janice Hamilton?
Here comes Janice.
Ms. Hamilton?
Yeah,
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm representing, can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Or should I lower it a little bit? Is that better?
Great.
Perfect. So I'm representing,
Drop the mic.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Thank
Okay,
you.
so I'm representing Prospect Heights, which I inherited a property from my parents, and I'm also representing Brownsville. Now, those two areas, Prospect Heights, of course, we know, is close to Park Slope. It's much richer than Brownsville. However, I have a two-family in Brownsville, and I have a multifamily in Prospect Heights. The bottom line is this. Okay, so overall, homeowners have, we're working poor. You back in the day, whatever years going back, we're lucky enough to buy a house. And the tax burden is, it's rising. 13% of the annual income have gone up over the years. The tax appeals with the tax commission is 35% over the previous decade. And, what's going on is that the salaries, that's why I said working poor, the household incomes over the same period have grown an average of 2% per year. And that is for renters as well as homeowners, okay? Based on this economy. Homeownership is something that many will only aspire to achieve. Only a few will achieve it. Many will aspire it. The big private developers that's happening now with the gentrification in Brooklyn especially, so people are to sell their places because they can't afford to pay the property tax, and all you'll have is private developers knocking down Nehemiah houses from Brownsville to East New York, and everybody's going to sell their house in Bed-Stuy and Prospect Heights to private developers, and they're getting air rights, and they're built on top of roofs, and this whole thing is happening. Where the hell are you going to live? Do you really think you can buy your house back or your building back? I mean, it's literally impossible. So I just want to mention also very importantly that, let me come back to this, is that, one second. Okay, so the new tax law caps the deductions on state and local taxes at $10,000, all right? Which I think is really crappy. So all the rich people in Long Island, includes my manager that lives in Long Island and Westchester, they can afford to live there. They're even crying poor, all right? And they make a lot more than a staff person. They live in these areas. So you used to itemize property, homeowners with property, itemize these deductions. You're limited now, and it keeps rising and rising. The infrastructure is falling apart. all right? What's holding, especially with New York Housing Preservation and Development, with the low-income affordability, you used to have programs for homeowners and renters and give the tax abatements or whatever. There's no more of the home ownership more. It's low-income affordable. But home ownership in the area that's supposed to improve the neighborhood. That's what HPD was all about with their programs from the 80s in Harlem coming right into the current time. I don't know, I mean, I guess we're just gonna be overtaken by private developers. You gotta give people a chance. You know, the renters are crying, the homeowners are crying, okay? Because you can't keep the rent the same for 20 years. That's impossible. 10 years, 5 years. It's gotta go up $1, okay?
Yes.
Because your water rates, your tax rates, nobody controls that. What I'm saying is consider freezing. It's been 500 years. Freeze the rate for at least a year and a half. What's 1 year? Maybe that helps overall. I don't know what 1 year does, but I mean, or keep it stabilized. Keep it stabilized at a reasonable rate. The infrastructure's falling apart. The damn roads, my tires, I gotta fix. I'm going over potholes. I gotta report 311. You spend half that money in public education. I'm a CUNY graduate, okay? From a CUNY college. I didn't fully graduate from John Jay, but at least I have some college. Now, I pay taxes. My parents pay taxes, all right? So give me a small, when I go to finish that, whatever it is, give me, because I'm a property taxpayer and I go to CUNY and a public university, give me a little something, a discount, because I'm a property tax. You're giving public school, you supported me from kindergarten all the way to 12th grade, all right? So what happened to higher education? I know CUNY is reasonable. The infrastructure, the roads, so what you just pay out and pay out and keep paying.
We hear you on the infrastructure.
So that's all I'm asking.
We hear you on the infrastructure. We really appreciate hearing from you, and thank you very much.
Okay.
Rabbi Eli Cohen. You're at the end.
Hi, thank you for staying late, although I know you're a captive audience, but still. The first thing I want to say, first of all, I'm the executive director of the Crown Heights Jewish Community Council, and Crown Heights is a neighborhood which has undergone a lot of gentrification. Maybe 30 years ago, people could buy homes for $20,000. Or 18 years ago, I bought a home, thank God, for $250,000, $260,000. Today, that home is probably could be sold for $1.3 million. So I and my Caribbean American neighbors, I don't believe that it's a racial thing at all, because clearly my neighbors on both sides are Caribbean Americans, African Americans, people who've been in their homes for 30, 40 years. They're my clients at the Crown Heights Jewish Community Council, also where they come for assistance with things like Enhanced Star or whatever it is they need help with. They need this help. They need the cap. The cap has to stay. That's number one. Now, as far as change of ownership, there are 2 points here that we have to take into consideration with change of ownership, and that is, one is in parents passing to their children. Are we going to look at that as a change of ownership or not? This is a very important point that we have to take into account and make sure that children are not penalized for staying in the home that their parents occupied, and we have that a lot happening. The other thing that we need to think about with change of ownership is that people who want to stay, we talk about changing neighborhoods, people who want to stay in a neighborhood, people who grew up in a neighborhood, my children in their 30s would love to buy a home in Crown Heights, but they can't afford to. Now, if we're going to have the reset, that's a double reason why somebody from somewhere else coming with a lot of cash who can't afford Park Slope is going to come and buy that home, and my kids can't afford to buy it, even if they're doing a little better than average, right? So these are two areas where we really have to be careful with change of ownership. Now, the other thing, a number of people have called me, they heard that this is going on. I'm just reiterating what a lot of people have said already. Condo owners, single home owner-occupied condos are not being treated right. And they're paying, not being treated right, are paying double, 1.5 times to double the taxes of a similar size in number of bedrooms of a single-family home. So this is clearly an area that has to be addressed. And the co-op owners with the 20,000 and that's just off the charts. Obviously, we have to deal with that. Two more little things that I just want to add. We heard it from a number of people, but I also see it a lot, especially with people who are not quite seniors, but are in that little, like, they get into their 50s, their abatements expire. Suddenly, $700 a month additional cost on their condo. So we have to address that. It's if Councilman Lander's extra taxes can help, that's an area that we have to apply it to. And just another thing to think about, when you pay property taxes, it's not like income taxes. There are no exemptions for the number of people that are in the family. So if I'm paying, if I earn $100,000 a year and I am paying $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 in taxes on my home, it doesn't matter if it's a single person living there or if it's a whole family, the same rate. And just by the way, you asked this question, so I'll give you the answer. In 2005, my property taxes on my single-family home, $2,800. Today, $6,800 minus the star exemption, $5,460. So we almost double in 12, 13 years. And that is not revenue neutral. I would agree with what a lot of people have said. It's not, the expenses of city government have not doubled in 13 years. No way. So I think that this is something that we also have to be taking into account.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
the last.
Stephanie Eisenberg.
Hi. First of all, I'd like you all to prove me wrong about my assumption about what this tax commission is all about. Okay? I have seen numerous occasions in city council when we play the game, we're listening to you, what do you want? And then you don't do anything. So I hope you prove me wrong, because the tax situation is really a disaster. I have a factory. We all say, Williamsburg, keep the factories. We need the jobs. I have 12 tenants. Every single year you increase the taxes. Okay? Why? Oh, then you say, you should be making a lot more a square foot. Why are you only charging these people $11 or $12 a square foot? You should be making $30 a square foot or $20. There is absolutely, no transparency in how you determine it. The city of New York has locked up the Brooklyn assessors, so you can't even talk to them anymore. Are you aware of that? Yes or no? Okay,
Locked
they
up?
locked them up. Okay.
Okay.
So if you have a question about an assessment, no, call 311. Okay, it's grossly unacceptable. Okay, so that's the factory. So now I have to decide, do I sell that and get a lot of money by a big developer? You know what's happening. Now you say, oh, we don't want any more hotels. But you don't want the factory either. So I have 12 tenants. You basically control their fate. I moved my factory upstate years ago because I couldn't afford the taxes. Okay, that's one thing. The other thing is, so there's really, every year you ask for information with the tax commission, and I had a rude awakening this year. I got a reduction on a property, okay, on the factory. They gave me a reduction. But the city only feeds in 20% a year. So it's still costing me 20% more for the taxes. Wow, that sounds like you're, rigging a deck of cards. I could say something else about that, but it's fixed, okay, because you feed it in. Then they say they also feed in on the assessed value, but they make that so high that on the condominium I'm in, and I've been there, it was one of the first affordable condominiums built in Williamsburg, the rate went up everybody's taxes went up 35% this year. Mm-hmm. So now they're averaging 3 times what the house across the street is. Another great example is that on Bedford, there's a little 3-family house, and the ground floor's got a tenant in it, okay? They're paying $4,200 a year in taxes, and the income on the ground floor is $20,000 a month, okay? I know all these people. And is that equitable? But my taxes on a commercial condominium went in 5 years from $45,000 under Bloomberg to de Blasio's $130,000, okay, which is not payable. So the tax inequity in this city is outrageous, okay, on all levels. Now, Oregon has solved the issue. They don't have assessors. They don't have a tax department. Nobody could lose their jobs. No Department of Finance, and they charge 1% of the sales price. And I think that somehow or other, I don't know what I expect from the tax commission, but I don't know what you're going to do.
Thank you. We will look into the Oregon
Thank you.
situation.
Yeah. Sandra Linenschmidt? Sandra Linenschmidt. All right, we'll try something else. Nancy Shear.
I appreciate that you're here at this late hour, because I'm here, and I'm tired. So
thank you for staying with us.
and I really appreciate it. And I actually only came to accompany my friend Stephanie, who just spoke. But then she suggested I might put in my 2 cents, because I'm sort of a fish out of water here. I'm a rental tenant in a 421A building here in Brooklyn. So since you're so open to suggestions, I'd like to make a small suggestion on a way the city might recapture some revenue. And that is, I'm aware that the 421A law has a default position when the owner is in noncompliance on a number of levels in the building. In my building, the landlord hasn't been in compliance since the first initial rent registration with DHCR. I just won a big case in appellate term, and we are also in federal court slogging it out with a civil racketeering case against this particular guy. So maybe you should enforce the law. Maybe you should take that default position. Maybe you should go back and recap. He collected tax exemptions for over 10 years, and he never even put in a final application to HPD. So, and I don't think he's the only one. So I'd just like to suggest that the city and the state might be a little bit more attuned to who is in compliance with the law, because the tenants in my building have suffered mightily from the disinterest of both the city and the state. So, who knows?
By the way, we have been enforcing that law the past 6 months. Working with HPD, we have revoked 421A from a number of landlords.
Well, you should definitely take a look. I was the first tenant in my apartment, in my building, so.
For this particular reason, yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear that.
Yes.
I wish you luck, really.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We appreciate that.
125 Court Street. 125 Court Street, yeah.
Thank you. Avi Greenstein, or Stein.
Hi, thank you. It's Greenstein.
Greenstein.
Thank you. I know it's very late, so I'll try to make this very quick. But I am the CEO and the Executive Director of the Borough Park Jewish Community Council. Our JCC oversees, and under our jurisdiction, helping the community of Borough Park, we oversee over 30,000 families. People turn to us in times of needs and in times of crisis. And it's become very apparent the major concern for middle-income families. This is a key word, middle-income families. Parents who've been living here for generations and have worked and continue to work so hard creating businesses and caring for their families and their communities, and they are forced out. That's the way it is. The system has been set up. The policies have been set up in such a way that middle-income citizens, New Yorkers, people, are being forced out of the city. I've been sitting here for hours listening to testimonies, and I was shocked. I mean, I thought I've seen it all in our communities, but I've heard from people here. These are homes. For some reason, all the fancy terminologies have been set up in such a way where the assessment is a luxury condominium, not a luxury condominium. These are people working every day, waking up, trying to take care of their families, and they are being placed in a position where at some point, because of the way the system is set up, people specifically living in condos are being told, you know, you've been paying a certain abatement, which is part of their calculations in purchasing a home, and, you know, and then suddenly the 15 years is over, and now, disproportionately, their income didn't go up, their family planning has been set up in some sort of way, the system has not allowed them to understand clearly, in a transparent way, why they're paying and how they're paying and what their process of payments of taxes is. And so now they had this unbelievable increase. People walk into our offices telling us that their taxes suddenly have been set up in just unbelievable numbers. 10,000, 12,000. I had a family come in and explain to us $22,000 a year in taxes, one year to the next. This is unacceptable, and I think this important commission must do what you can to brainstorm, to come up with ideas, to take the advice that have been shared here tonight, to think, what can we do to help attract middle-income families to stay in this great city and not be forced to leave elsewhere for just a more desirable tax policy system. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Jessica Franco. You waited a long time.
Good evening, everyone. Yes, it's very late, and thank you again. 4 years ago, my husband and I were able to accomplish the American dream. We became homeowners, and although we both have full-time jobs, we were priced out of our community. We were priced out from buying in our community. We were lucky to find a home in our surrounding community. We have been blessed with great tenants who take care of our property and pay on time. But I'm afraid that due to the rapid increase in property tax, we will be forced to increase our tenants' monthly rent. Or my husband and I will have to work extra hours and spend less time with our 3 kids. I understand that services are paid through our taxes. I don't mind paying my fair share, but please give my community our fair share of services. Every time I need to call the police department due to someone blocking my driveway, I have to wait 6 to 7 hours for a response. Or when I ask my local schools, why do they have overcrowded classrooms, the response is always the lack of resources or lack of funding. It does us no benefit to have a high property value if we're not going to refinance or sell, and I'm not going to refinance or sell my home. Frankly, I am very concerned for the future. The truth is that at this rate, my kids, the next generation, won't be able to be homeowners. Even if they do everything right, they graduate high school, graduate college, and get a decent paying job, a city worker, a teacher, a police officer, they won't be able to afford to buy their property in our community. The rapid property increase due to the high market value is causing displacement. Property taxes should be based more on actual property value, such as amenities and square footage, and less on the speculation of real estate market value. I currently live in East New York. When I bought my home, the value was $376,000. The annual taxes were $2,487. Right now, it is the market value is $1,048,000, and the annual taxes are $6,200. And this is in less than 4 years. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to go back through a couple of people who we called their names and didn't get anyone. So I believe it's Steve, although it could be something else, from 115 Ashland Place. Okay. Richard Daskin. Mayako Kato, Sandra Lenenschmidt. Is there anyone here who signed up but who we didn't call? Okay, we all very much appreciate your being here. We appreciate Assemblywoman Simon, and Brian Kavanaugh was here with us listening also. We very much appreciate you all coming and listening and giving us your views of the problems and your solutions. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
My name was not on the list.
I'm sorry?
My name was not on the list, but I have a proposal.
Okay.
The
Tell us.
proposal is that the people who determine the
Come close to the mic.
the personnel who determines the taxes should put a ceiling on not only on the property taxes, but on the age at which people pay taxes. I have a neighbor.
Put a ceiling on the age. Okay.
Ceiling of the age. I have a neighbor, she can hardly walk.
Okay.
And-
She should be getting the
The
exemption?
exemptions is nothing.
I see. Okay.
It's nothing compared to the state of our health.
I see. Okay. Thank you very much for that
So
suggestion.
that is my proposal. Please put a ceiling on the age of when you should cease paying taxes.
Thank you.
That is too much stress for ageable people.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
We appreciate hearing from you. How old are you? You're only 50. Come on.
All right, boys and girls.